In 2016, I moved into a beautiful, turn-of-the-century brick mansion that overlooked Decatur Lake in central Illinois. The house was large enough to be divided into 3 apartments, and I lived on the main floor. Not long after moving in, strange things started happening. Objects would fall or get knocked off tables or the couch whenever I left the room. It happened so often that it felt a bit odd, but I brushed it off. About a month later, I took a shower in the middle of the day, and as soon as I pulled back the shower curtain, my hair dryer, sitting across the room, turned on by itself. I was creeped out but tried to convince myself it was probably an electrical glitch from the old wiring or maybe static from the shower. I didn't mention it to anyone and just tried to shake it off. 2 days later, at 2 a.m., my boyfriend got up to use the bathroom while I was asleep. I was jolted awake by a loud rattling and clunking sound that only lasted a few seconds, followed by my boyfriend cursing. He came back looking spooked and told me that his electric travel razor, which was on the toilet's water tank, had suddenly turned on. The noise was incredibly loud at that hour, and he said, "I didn't touch it or anything. It's not even plugged in. How does that happen?" A chill ran down my spine. The hair dryer had turned on for me, and now his razor had turned on for him. Things only got creepier from there. In the house, we found strange symbols like swastikas and iron crosses embedded around the old fireplace, which was disturbing to see in 2016. One night, around 2 or 3 a.m., we were both woken up by an extremely loud bang in our bedroom. My boyfriend, a Marine, instantly grabbed his gun. The bang sounded like a huge stack of heavy books had fallen from the ceiling to the floor. I reached for the light switch, expecting to see something broken or scattered, but the room was completely normal. Nothing had fallen. We never figured out what caused that noise. Over the next few months, my boyfriend and I split up and I lived there alone. At night, just as I'd be drifting off to sleep, I'd feel what seemed like a scream right in my ear. Came with a feeling like electric jolts in my head. Wrong, almost violent, as if I was being attacked. The sensations felt so intense that I began worrying I might have a seizure disorder or even a brain tumor. Then, about a month later, I had a date over. We were sitting on the couch talking when, suddenly, he interrupted me and said, "I don't want to seem weird, but do you believe in spirits or ghosts?" I stared at him, shocked. He didn't know any of the strange things that had happened in the house. I said, "Not really, but since moving here, some weird things have happened that make me wonder." He looked uneasy and said, "I really don't want to scare you, but I can see spirits, and there's definitely one here. A woman. She's on your porch right now." I felt the blood drain from my face. He continued, "She's wearing a bathrobe and looks like she's from the 50s or 60s. She died here in the bathroom. Suicide in the tub." At that point, I was in complete shock. I told him about the strange things I'd experienced since moving in, and he said they were likely all her doing. Not long after, I moved out and into a small one-bedroom house across the lake. Since then, I haven't experienced any strange electric jolts, objects turning on by themselves, or things falling. All those things only happened in that house. The same guy who told me about the spirit visited me a month or 2 after I moved. He told me how much he liked my new place and said it was a much healthier environment for me. He also admitted that he hadn't wanted to scare me at the time, but he was relieved I'd left that house because there was a dark presence there, and the woman's spirit wasn't friendly. She wanted to harm me. I was never a believer in ghosts or spirits, but after that experience, I'm 100% convinced the place was haunted. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'll start in January 2019, though this story began earlier. It was around then that I realized something wasn't right with me. I was becoming more and more depressed. Usually, I can figure out what's bothering me and work through it, but this time felt different. There was no clear cause. It didn't feel tied to any life event, like losing a job or a loved one. I was just slipping into a dark place without reason, and nothing I tried was helping. In March, I went to the doctor who ran a full blood panel. It turned out I was dangerously low on vitamin D. I know it sounds strange that a vitamin could affect my mood, but vitamin D acts a lot like a hormone and impacts everything from the immune system to emotions. Low levels can cause depression. That, combined with stress at work and a tense situation at home with my roommate, was not helping. I hoped this was the answer and that things would improve, but it only got worse. Over the next few months, my roommate's behavior took a troubling turn. He became secretive, easily angered, and even violent at times. He refused to take care of himself, making excuses, and he trashed the apartment to the point where I stopped inviting anyone over. It was as if the growth and social skills he'd developed over the past decade vanished. When I tried to read his energy, it felt dark and made me feel sick. I began worrying for my safety and considered advising his state guardian that he might need more help than I could provide. By November, my depression was at an all-time low. The rabbit hole of darkness I was in felt deeper than ever. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my computer trying to cheer myself up, I heard a voice from my closet. It was my father's voice, harsh and critical, like he'd been when he was alive. He listed all my faults and failures, calling me worthless and saying I should just end it all. I sat there, listening, just as I had growing up, and found myself nodding along. But then, something strange happened. Suddenly, it felt like I was struck in the chest with a jolt of energy. I covered my ears, looked at the closet, and heard myself saying, "Shut up, you're dead and gone. You couldn't break me then, and you won't now." The energy kept pulsing in my chest, filling me with strength. And then silence. Beautiful silence. I knew that hearing voices telling me to harm myself was serious, so I sought help. It was hard to be honest about it, but I knew I needed support. I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression, and now see Dr. G weekly. I'm getting stronger, and the darkness feels a little less overwhelming. In January 2020, things with my roommate took a turn. I often felt sick just being near him, sensing disturbing things I didn't want to believe. I tried to ignore it, thinking my depression was making me see things darker than they were. But one day, the police arrived with a search warrant. That was the last I saw of him. My landlord worried about how I'd manage financially, but I decided to take this time to fix up the apartment before finding a new roommate. I worked with Dr. G and a caseworker to help me through the transition. My roommate's room was in terrible shape, and I refused any help with cleaning it, preferring to handle it myself. As I worked on the apartment, the small, ghostly things I'd missed began happening again, like objects moving on their own. One day, I found the mug rack that had hung for years had been carefully laid on the counter with the mugs still intact. I took it as a sign that maybe I should start fresh and redecorate. In the bathroom, I decided to take down an old towel rack I'd always disliked. It was so deeply embedded in the wall that it took part of the wall with it when I removed it. As I stared at the damage, I heard a male voice say, "Got putty." Another time, I wondered out loud if I should paint a cabinet, and the same voice replied, "I would." One day, while I was on a small ladder in the living room, it wobbled, but I felt it steady, and the voice said, "Careful, I got you." These little interactions were comforting. Now I'm working on the bedroom. Some days the projects feel overwhelming, especially with work on hold due to the pandemic. Occasionally, I feel a gentle pat on my shoulder or a soft hug. Sometimes, I'll complain to myself about the furniture delays, and the voice will chime in with a playful, "How many chairs can you sit on at once?" It always makes me smile. It's now November, a year after hitting rock bottom, and I wonder, if my father's voice hadn't triggered me that day, would I have reached out for help? Maybe, in a strange way, it saved me. He always knew that anger would make me fight back and that fear would make me ask for support. Perhaps what I saw as something dark actually pushed me toward my own strength and healing. Like many of you, I'm all too familiar with the "where did that go?" and "where did this come from?" mysteries. Ghosts everywhere seem to love playing these little games. Sometimes there's a simple reason for things disappearing or showing up: forgetfulness, pets, even another person. But every now and then, I just find myself scratching my head and thinking, it's mostly the random gifts that make me pause. These little surprises didn't all happen at once. They showed up in my apartment over the years. Fine lines of sand would appear on tables or other surfaces. No beaches or sandboxes anywhere nearby. Money would just show up. Not a lot, but always just enough. An old, rusty nail, the kind with flat sides and a square head, appeared in the middle of my bedroom floor one day. I have no idea how it got there. Random screws, staples, and bits of colored glass would pop up in different rooms at different times. But the strangest gift of all happened just recently, in March. I was hand-washing some clothes in the bathtub and, as always, shook out each item before adding it to the water to avoid any cat hair sticking. After soaking and scrubbing the clothes, I drained the water, pressed the soap out of the fabric, and rinsed again. After about 5 rounds of filling and draining the tub, I decided to bleach them. When I finally drained the bleach water, sitting there in the bottom of the tub was a carrot coin. It was fresh and crisp looking, and we hadn't had carrots of any kind for months. Around the same time, something else happened that wasn't paranormal. My roommate's homeless friend had been staying in our basement, which is illegal. Things got tense when I told him to leave. I got a serious bad vibe from him and later found out he had a criminal background, including prison time for violence and drugs. Definitely not the kind of person I wanted around. In late April, I noticed my small silver jewelry box was missing. I had sentimental pieces in there, a twin ruby ring from my mom and a small 90-year-old cameo pendant. I searched everywhere, on top of things, underneath things, and even in places it had no business being, like the freezer and the basement. My roommate assured me that no one had been in the apartment, but I started to wonder if he was telling the truth, given that his friend had been sneaking in before. By June, I had almost lost hope. One night, a friend asked if I'd found the box. I sighed and said, "I guess my last hope is the ghosties. Maybe they'll bring it back." That's when things got truly weird. The very next day, I felt the strong urge to search the foyer closet one more time. I'd already cleaned it out twice during my search, but I thought, why not? Up on the top shelf, out of reach, was a cardboard catch-all box. I'd already gone through it before, but I decided to check it again. With some effort, I got it down, and there, inside the box, was an old wooden cigar box I had never seen before. My roommate swore he hadn't either. Inside the cigar box was my silver jewelry box, with all its contents intact. And it wasn't just that. There were other items that had been missing for months or even years. I found my best scissors, gone for 2 months. A ring my roommate lost 6 years ago. A few coins, some old receipts from 2013 and 1997, and some random odds and ends. It felt like someone or something had taken pity on me and decided to return everything they could, plus a little extra. As many of you know, I've had a lot of paranormal experiences over the years. Not to brag or impress, it's just a fact. But one thing I hadn't experienced, or so I thought, was seeing orbs. I'd never spotted anything in my photos, nor had I ever seen anything floating around that I'd label as an orb. At least, that's what I thought until I read a story online titled Biblio at Warwick Castle. The author described an orb he saw as an electric dandelion seed, floating lazily about the room about 5 feet above the floor. That description hit me like a flashback, bringing up memories from my childhood. Until I read those words, I'd never thought that what I'd seen might be orbs. Back then, I simply thought of them as magical little lights. When I was around 6, I was somewhat of a middle child in a big family. My 2 oldest siblings were already out of the house. My mom was busy with my 2 younger siblings, and my 2 older brothers often left me to fend for myself. So I spent a lot of time with our family dog, Rebel, exploring and playing on my own. One evening, we were outside at dusk. My brothers had managed to slip away, leaving me alone in the yard with Rebel. As I played in the glow from the house's windows, I noticed a soft light moving in the air. I thought it was a lightning bug, but then I realized it wasn't blinking. It had a steady, soft glow, with fuzzy edges. I watched it float around, and soon, more lights appeared. They drifted through the air, sometimes coming close before floating away again. They looked like tiny, glowing dandelion seeds. I thought they were beautiful and imagined they must be fairy lights, dancing on their way to a magical party. Rebel just sat by my side, watching the lights with me, not at all bothered. The lights didn't appear every night, maybe because I wasn't always outside at dusk. I tried telling others about them, but they laughed and said they were just lightning bugs. After that, I kept my little secret to myself. Years later, when I was almost 12, I saw the lights again. I'd just gotten out of the hospital after a simple tonsil and adenoid removal, but due to some complications, I'd been kept for nearly a week. My throat was still sore, so I was quiet as my parents drove me home. My dad was eager to get home, while my mom kept reaching back to pat my hand, asking if I was hungry. I wouldn't have been surprised if she had a cup of Jell-O in her purse just in case I said yes. It was almost dark when we reached the long bridge near our home. As I stared out the car window, I noticed tiny lights dancing over the water. I mentally sorted them from the reflections of streetlights and felt a little flutter of excitement. My dad noticed me staring and asked what I was looking at. Without thinking, I said, "The fairy lights." He chuckled and said that, with an imagination like mine, I'd never be lonely. Just then, one of the lights floated right up to my window and kept pace with the car as we crossed the bridge. At the other end, it turned and slipped through the bridge girder, vanishing from sight. I didn't bother to mention it again, but I never forgot. Over the years, I came to realize that no matter where I was, there was always a chance I'd see those fairy lights again. My mother-in-law, Mia, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's a few years ago. She was only about 55 when they discovered it. This past month, her condition worsened dramatically, so we traveled over 2,000 miles from the West Coast to the North Shore of Chicago to see her and wish her peace. By that point, she was no longer on life support and had lost the ability to swallow, essentially starving. A very painful and agonizing way to go. A little backstory on Mia. She was of Italian descent and grew up in poverty. She had my partner when she was just 15, dropped out of high school, and worked hard to support her baby. Her home life was challenging, to say the least. Then, in her early 20s, she met Tony, an older Italian man who was a guest at the hotel bar where she worked. He was 17 years her senior. They eventually married, and Mia had 2 more sons with him. Tony adopted my partner and raised him as his own. He was a wealthy businessman from Chicago and did everything he could to make sure Mia and the boys had a comfortable life. Though Mia and Tony eventually divorced, they remained close friends, and he continued to be there for her, even as her health declined. In the early years of my relationship with my partner, Mia and I were very close. My partner, her oldest son, was a serial monogamist, never married, and well into his 30s when we met. Mia and I talked on the phone often, texted, and made plans for girls, only trips that never quite happened. She'd never liked any of his previous girlfriends, but she welcomed me as if I were the daughter she never had, calling me her baby girl, something that will come up later. Now, here's where things take a bit of a supernatural turn. A few months ago, I downloaded a ghost radar app, not expecting much from it. I'd used it a couple of times just for fun, and nothing of note happened until one evening on our patio. The app displayed the word east. Out of curiosity, I walked east on our property toward the garden, but nothing happened, so I went back. Then, the app said, August, followed shortly by prepare. I didn't understand the meaning of east at the time, but prepare and August felt ominous. Then August arrived, and so did the bad news. On August 15th, we were told Mia's time was limited. Flights were booked, tears were shed, and we tried to prepare ourselves. Now I understood the meaning of August, prepare, and east. Illinois is east of Oregon, where we live. A few days before we left, her youngest son came to visit us. He'd seen Mia earlier that spring before she lost the ability to speak and had recorded some of their conversations. Most of what she said didn't make sense, but one part haunted me. She spoke about seeing a baby girl who had died, saying, "Yes, just a baby girl, baby girl." Part of me wondered if she meant me, her baby girl, perhaps feeling I was gone, since we hadn't spoken in a while. Her oldest son had also had breathing issues as a child, so perhaps her mind was merging memories in a state of confusion. When we arrived at the hospice, the once vibrant woman we loved had wasted away, barely recognizable at 80 pounds. She was incoherent and unable to communicate, though on Tuesday, she seemed to respond to music and make brief eye contact. By Wednesday, she was barely holding on, eyes half closed and mouth slightly open, close to death. Her youngest son stayed by her side through that night. The next morning, we planned to visit her in the afternoon, but at 2:45 p.m., Tony got a call that her breathing had become shallow and her vitals were dropping. We rushed to gather our things and headed to hospice, but she passed at 3:15, just as we were nearing. Tony got the call when we were only a few blocks away. We spent some quiet time with her afterward. I gathered her belongings while her sons hugged her and kissed her forehead. We'd already made arrangements with a funeral home, so Tony called to confirm the details for her service. In the days that followed, I was asked to go through her belongings and select photos for collages at her service. I found hundreds of old family photos, baby pictures, family vacations, and moments from happier times. As the only female in the family, I was also asked to choose her outfit for the viewing. It's deeply personal to go through someone's things and select a final dress for them, but I chose a striking red designer dress that felt fitting for her. That week, we stayed at Tony's old Victorian house, where odd things began to happen. It was summer in Chicago, hot and humid. Tony didn't like using the central air, so we slept with a big box fan in the window and the ceiling fan on. I'd set the AC to 68, and he'd turn it up to 80. The ceiling fan had one of those round dial switches on the wall, the kind that clicks when you turn it, and the box fan switch was on top, not easily bumped off. The bedroom doors also stuck and creaked loudly when opened, so if you opened them at night, even the hard-of-hearing dog downstairs would bark. But for some reason, every morning we'd wake up to find the box fan off, with the switch in the off position, even though we hadn't touched it. The ceiling fan would also be off in the morning. One night, I woke to the door rattling, like a gentle earthquake was making it move. I checked, but it was still snug in its frame, with no wind and no reason to rattle. One night, as we watched TV in bed, the ceiling fan suddenly switched off. I got up, confused, turned it back on, and we continued watching. My partner barely seemed to notice, but I was definitely freaked out by this. Another strange thing happened with my tablet charger. I'd plug it in every night, only to find it unplugged in the morning. I checked the socket, thinking it might be loose, but it was very tight. One afternoon, we were tidying up and turned on a lamp in the living room. It flickered out and I thought nothing of it. Later, Tony asked if we'd changed the bulb, saying, "It's been out for a long time, and I hadn't gotten around to replacing it. Maybe it was a wiring issue, but it felt strange given everything else." The night before Mia's service, we were up late making a playlist for the visitation. I'm a light sleeper, so I brought bright fluorescent earplugs. After finishing the playlist, I got ready for bed, but one earplug was missing. I searched everywhere with the flashlight on my phone, and the floors were hardwood, so I thought it'd be easy to spot. But it was nowhere to be found. Eventually, I gave up, but after a bit, I decided to check one more time. And there, in plain sight under the bed, was my missing earplug, even though we'd both looked there at least 10 times. A few other strange things happened that I can't share publicly, but I can't help feeling that going through Mia's belongings and being with her in her final days may have drawn her spirit back. The person she became as Alzheimer's took over was often mean and hurtful, especially to her sons, leaving scars that we're still working through. We forgave her before she passed, but it's hard to fully separate the disease from the person. Looking through her photos reminded me of who she once was: funny, beautiful, and full of life. Maybe the strange occurrences can be explained away, but I choose to believe that Mia was showing us her playful presence one last time, finally free from the prison of Alzheimer's. The building had once been a gas station before being remodeled into a candy store by a prominent company. Despite the new setup with large plate glass windows on 3 sides and an oversized side door for deliveries, formerly the garage bay, it still felt like a gas station to me. And I'm guessing to the resident ghost as well. I started working there around 2004, mostly night shifts and often alone. Business was slow. After all, we sold high-end chocolates, not penny candy. But even on quiet nights, I quickly realized I wasn't truly alone. It started with that eerie cobwebby tingling on the back of my neck, sometimes spreading over my whole body, paired with the sensation of being watched. There were other things too. The radio, for instance, refused to stay tuned to any station but the local country station. No matter how often I'd change it, within minutes it would dial itself back. Every now and then, I'd catch a faint whiff of oil and grease, accompanied by a subtle sound of movement, as though someone were tinkering in the old bay. Once in a while, I'd even hear what sounded like an air compressor. Since I've always been a bit of a fix-it person, I kept a small toolkit on a shelf near the phone. But almost every time I needed a tool, the whole kit would go missing, only to reappear on the shelf in the old bay area, right where a mechanic would keep it. This was odd enough, given that I was often the only person there. After a couple of months of this, I said aloud, "Okay, I'll keep it here, but no more moving it, all right?" From then on, the tool stayed in place, though if I left one out, I'd later find it tucked back into the kit. Since my shift overlapped with another worker's, I wasn't alone for the first hour. I was a little surprised when coworkers began confessing they thought the place was haunted, often just as they were leaving the job. Not because anything harmful happened, but because they were spooked. They describe hearing strange noises from the old bay area, finding things moved from where they'd left them, or watching boxes fly off shelves. One worker, a big fan of rap music, kept trying to play it in the store, but the radio kept unplugging itself. It was either country music or silence. The first time I heard what sounded like footsteps in the back room, even though I knew I was alone, I actually walked outside, circled the building, and checked that the side door was locked. After that, I always double-checked before the other worker left. One night, while working in the Bay Area putting away stock, I distinctly heard a deep male voice say, "George, ma'am." The voice had a country twang, and I felt that familiar tingling. I glanced around and said, "Hello." "Nothing." "Okay," I said. "I'm going to assume that's your name, all right?" From then on, we called him George, and I didn't elaborate on why. If asked, I'd just shrug and say, "We've got to call him something, right?" Sometimes, especially when I was working alone at night, customers would come in who just didn't feel right. They'd ask odd questions about whether we had cameras, or if I ever got scared working alone. Felt like they were fishing for information. But usually, there'd be a noise from the back room, as if someone were moving around. I'd smile sweetly and say, "Oh, I'm not alone. George is here." Most of the time, that was enough to make them quickly wrap up and leave. One afternoon, I was working with a coworker who believed strongly that all spirits were demons. She insisted we exorcise George before he turned malicious and started possessing us. Right at that moment, we heard a loud crash. We rushed to the back and saw several boxes arranged on the floor in the shape of a cross, with a strong smell of gas and oil lingering in the air. She gasped, and I asked her, "How many demons do you know that make the sign of the cross?" She didn't respond, just left, and never came back. That incident made me realize it was time to have a serious talk with George. I'd recently learned from some research that the previous building owner had indeed been named George. A mechanic and known as a skilled, dedicated worker, he had spent nearly his entire life in that station. He'd passed away on-site working on a car. One night after closing, I went to the Bay Area and spoke aloud, telling George he had done a great job and was a good person, but his work was finished now. I told him I'd appreciate it if he could move on, but also that he was a great coworker and protector. "But you really need to stop scaring everyone," I added with a smile. After that, things quieted down. The radio stayed tuned to any station we chose, except rap, and coworkers stopped mentioning strange happenings. When I was alone, though, the country station would sometimes tune in on its own, and I'd feel that familiar cobwebby sensation. I think George stayed around for a little while longer. Then, one day, the feeling was gone. I like to believe George finally decided it was time to move on. Back in 2013, we moved to a small, quiet town called Roselle, about 25 miles outside of Chicago. At first, we loved it. Moving there felt like starting a new chapter. But not long after we settled in, things started to change. One evening, I was sitting in the dining room having dinner around 8:30 p.m. when suddenly, there was a loud bang on the patio door. I looked up quickly, expecting to see someone or something, but there was nothing there. The next morning, I asked my mom about it, but she told me not to worry. So, I shrugged it off and tried to ignore it. For a few days, things were quiet. No strange noises. Nothing unusual. Then one night, as I was closing the garage door, I heard a loud slam from the third floor. I ran past the foyer and up the stairs, and what I saw was unbelievable. The hall bathroom door was closed. I knew I'd left that door open, and no one else was home at the time. All the windows were closed, too, so there was no draft. I still can't explain how that door closed on its own. The final incident was the one that really got to me. One day, I left the house with all the windows securely closed. When I returned about 2 hours later and walked through the door, I found that every window on the first floor was wide open. It was unsettling. No one had been home and the doors were locked. There was no sign of a break-in, and yet somehow all the windows had opened on their own. That third incident was the breaking point. I couldn't ignore it anymore, so I decided to do some research on the property. Roselle itself is a historic town, so I figured maybe there was something about the land or house that could explain the strange events. What I found was disturbing. The land our house sat on used to be the site of a meat factory back in the 50s and 60s. There had been a couple of deaths at the factory, and suddenly, the strange occurrences in our house started making sense. I realized that our house must be haunted. When I showed all this information to my mom, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that someone had died on the property. Not long after uncovering this history, we made the decision to sell the house and move elsewhere. Felt like a clear sign to leave and to never look back. Since then, I've checked the home's real estate status every now and then, and it still hasn't sold. No one has lived there since we left 5 years ago. At our new place, nothing out of the ordinary has happened. I sometimes wish that house didn't exist. It wasn't a good place to be, and I regret ever stepping foot in it. Now I live about 30 miles away, and I don't plan on going back to that area anytime soon. Journal entry, February 9th, 2018. I'm not saying this is paranormal because I've been sick, and that can play tricks on you. But sick or not, it's downright strange. Since my doctor won't let me go back to work until Monday, I decided to work on Trespass Manor, my online haunted house project. My goal was to make it responsive so it'd work well on mobile devices as well as PCs. The site is huge, and responsive coding is new to me, so I knew it'd be a time-consuming project. I had to go through every single page and, while I was at it, check links, update content, and clean out old files. Trespass is designed with image maps, pictures with clickable hotspots that trigger different effects. And strangely enough, I found that many of these hotspots had somehow shifted out of place. It was odd, but I figured it might be a result of adding new code. Then I reached the contact page, a page that's always been a bit frustrating. It's just a simple clickable link. I could build a contact form easily enough, but writing the backend PHP code that sends the message to a specific email address always tripped me up. PHP and I don't get along. And even with sample code from the web, it wouldn't work because of a thing called deprecation, where certain terms become outdated and can cause the whole code to fail. Finding that one outdated word and its new substitute is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Here's where things get strange. During the night, I thought I heard typing on my keyboard, but I'd turned the computer off, and since I was home alone, I didn't fully wake up. I assumed I was dreaming or that I'd heard something from the downstairs apartment. My medication makes me very sleepy, so I just drifted back off. But when I woke up, I found that my code had changed, and it was working perfectly. End of journal entry. Before I continue, let me clear up a few things that might raise questions. I know I had shut my computer down completely. My PC is in my bedroom, and when it's on, the lights from the keyboard, router, and tower are bright enough to be distracting, especially since they blink. Those were all off when I went to bed. But when I woke, the computer was not only on, but the screensaver was up. I wondered if maybe the computer had rebooted itself, but when I cleared the screensaver, my coding program was fully open to the exact piece of code that had been changed. When I tried to close it, the program asked if I wanted to save the changes. I don't have a logical explanation for this. I'd simply put it in my "that's weird" file until this morning. 5 years ago, I was in college for a degree in multimedia technologies, and I had a knack for debugging code. My PHP instructor especially liked that I could sniff out outdated words and make our class coding examples work. Deprecation in coding can happen fast. What worked 6 months ago might not work now, even if you find examples online. I remember one class where an example just wouldn't work. No one could figure it out. Finally, frustrated, I asked my instructor for help. And, dead serious, he looked at me and said, "I was hoping you could tell me." We both laughed, and together we figured it out, much to the class's relief. That moment sparked a bond between us. Even after I graduated, we'd occasionally message each other with, "Okay, what's wrong with this?" Our friendship stayed within the realm of coding, but it was a good one. Today, I learned of his passing on February 9th, the night my code mysteriously changed. It was the summer of 1984, and we decided to take our newly acquired, used Nimrod camper out for a trip. If you're unfamiliar with it, the Nimrod is basically a pop-up tent that folds into a compact trailer you can tow. Our destination was Shawnee National Forest, specifically the Garden of the Gods area in Harrod, at the southern tip of Illinois. It's a breathtaking, rustic place, with no hookups for water or power, just restrooms scattered around. The bathrooms were low cement buildings that reminded me of old-fashioned outhouses. Later, I learned they're called vault toilets. The forest is so massive that we didn't see anyone else or even any signs of people when we reached our assigned campsite, perched near the rim of a deep valley. Our son, Josh, was only 2.5 years old and eager to help his dad set up the camper while I went to gather firewood and set up the rest of our site. Cue the excitement of, "Ooh, lawn chairs." I wasn't gone long. Firewood's easy to find in a forest, and when I returned, my husband was still wrestling with the camper door. "Where's Josh?" I asked, not seeing him nearby. My husband half turned and said, "He's right," but froze, staring at an empty space. We immediately started calling Josh's name and searching the area. He was gone, with no sign of where he'd wandered off. I knelt down in the spot where he was last seen, making myself Josh-sized to get a sense of his perspective. My husband looked at me like I was crazy, but I ignored him, focusing instead on the grass and leaves, looking for any bent stems or faint footprints to guide me. While I scanned the ground, I kept hearing the old man's words from the registration cabin echo in my mind. "Watch out for bears and coyotes. There are snakes, too." My heart pounded at the thought of Josh mistaking a wild animal for a friendly cartoon character. I felt my husband's hand on my shoulder, and I turned to him sharply. "Go back to the registration area and tell them Josh is missing," I said firmly. "They'll send help. I'll keep looking." He started to protest, but then nodded and headed to the truck. He knew, city boy, that this was more my world than his. Once alone, I took a deep breath and calmed myself, opening up to whatever inner strength and intuition I had. I found myself moving to the opposite side of the camper, staring down into the valley. Huge boulders and towering trees filled the landscape below, some trees so massive their trunks were the size of a dining table. Eagles circled the valley, gliding through the air with ease, but I hardly noticed the beauty. I was focused on finding my little boy. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on a ridge to my left. I spun around but saw only trees. Dropping to my knee to get a closer look, I caught sight of a small, shadowy figure in the distance. It looked like a child, running through the shadows of the trees. "Josh!" I called. The shadow paused, seeming to look back at me, then darted behind a tree and disappeared. I was up in an instant, running toward where I'd seen it. In the back of my mind, I knew that a toddler couldn't run like that or cover so much distance. Still, the shadow seemed to be waiting just long enough to let me see it before vanishing again, as if leading me somewhere. I could have sworn I heard a man's voice say, "Leave a trail. Won't do any good to get lost yourself." I started breaking branches and snapping long-stemmed flowers as I went, leaving a clear path for myself. Out loud, I called, "Help me find my boy." I held back my tears. Now wasn't the time. Again, the shadow appeared, just ahead to the right, and I found myself running toward it, the voice reminding me to leave a trail. I forced myself to stop, calming my panic. Blindly chasing shadows wasn't going to help me find my son. Closing my eyes, I focused, trying to sense where Josh might be. An image began to form in my mind. A tunnel, and inside it, my child. It didn't make much sense, but it was something. Suddenly, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I jerked my head up to see the shadowy figure. Closer than ever. It was a child, a little older than Josh, still vague and hard to make out. This time, instead of running away, the shadow boy waved for me to follow. I broke another branch and kept going, the shadow boy glancing back now and then as if making sure I was still there. After a while, the shadow vanished, and I lost sight of him. Exhausted, I sat down on a large fallen log, staring back at the trail I'd left. "Oh, baby, where are you?" I whispered. Frustration and fear welled up inside me. "What's the point of this?" I cried out. "I don't understand." My voice cracked, and finally, I allowed myself to cry. Then, I felt a small hand on my thigh and heard a soft voice say, "Why cry?" I looked down, and there was Josh, standing right next to me. I grabbed him and hugged him tight, afraid he'd vanish if I let go. "You're squishing me," he laughed. "Where have you been, pumpkin? I've looked everywhere for you." He pointed at the log. "There," he said simply. "I didn't see you," I replied, baffled. He giggled. "Inside. My friend woke me up. He says you're here." Inside. I looked at the end of the log I'd been sitting on, squatted down, and saw it was hollow. It was like a tunnel just as I'd envisioned. I was playing with my friend and got tired. He said it was safe there. "Safer than out here," I agreed, though in my mind I was thinking of bears and coyotes. "We should get back to Daddy. He's looking for you too. Why'd you wander off like that?" As we followed the trail back, Josh told me his story. He'd gotten bored of helping his dad because he wasn't allowed to do much, so he started exploring. He'd been on the other side of the camper, looking at the birds, when a boy had appeared and told him it wasn't safe to play there. The boy's name was Chaska. When Josh got tired, Chaska had led him to the hollow log and kept him safe until I found him. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My father was in the Navy until I was 18, and spooky things happened in many of the places we lived. But our home in O'Fallon, Illinois was by far the worst. My parents planned to retire from the military, so they bought a brand new house. We lived there from 2006 to 2010, my 8th grade through junior year of high school. On move-in day, my dad, a skeptical but excitable man, came into the house, flustered and asking if any of us had come outside. No one had. He swears that as he was moving boxes in the trailer, he heard footsteps walking up the ramp behind him, making the whole trailer shake. Thinking it was one of us, he turned around to ask for help, but the sounds immediately stopped, and no one was there. Plenty of strange, unsettling things happened in that house. There were so many incidents that I can't remember the exact order, so I'll list them as they come to mind. The layout of the house was like this. My parents' bedroom was on the main floor, while my older sisters, younger brothers, and my bedrooms were upstairs. We also had a finished basement with a few individual rooms. Right from the start, we'd hear footsteps echoing throughout the house, and sometimes, the lights would turn on by themselves. One time, I came home to find only my mom and brother there. I went upstairs to change, and as I was on the stairs, I heard someone sprinting across the living room. It was loud, and I assumed it was my brother. A moment later, my mom called me, asking why I was running around. I said I thought it was my brother, but he was in the basement with her the whole time. In the basement, we had a small bar in its own room with French doors. Each family member, at some point, heard footsteps directly above them while in that room, often to the point where we thought someone else had come home. One night, my dad and I were watching TV in the bar, and the volume control appeared on the screen, going all the way down and then back up again. The remote, though, was sitting on the counter between us. Another time, my brother, Dad, and I were watching a movie together in the basement when we heard a loud metallic pop from upstairs. We checked and found that the French door to my parents' bedroom, which they always kept latched shut, was wide open. It was a difficult latch to open, yet there it was. My sister often heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward our bedrooms at night. At first, she thought it was our mom coming to check on us and would pretend to be asleep. Then she realized the footsteps never walked away. Whoever it was would just stop outside our doors. I had my own terrifying experiences. Once, I had a dream that I woke up in my bed to find everything in my room the same, except for a large, dark mass in the doorway. It was opaque and gave off a horrible feeling, and whenever I looked directly at it, it seemed to shrink. I woke up lying in the same position, feeling shaken. Soon after, my sister and I were in my room, joking about a magazine photo of Vil Vallo that I had tacked up near my bed. I joked that he was protecting me. And at that exact moment, a small painting of Archangel Michael, which I'd leaned against the wall on my dresser, slammed down by itself. We bolted out of the room. My sister and I would switch rooms occasionally, and she once swore she saw a face peering at her from the doorway. When she left for college, I permanently moved into her room, which was larger. My brother, who was about 11, had the room at the other end of the hall, connected to my old room by a Jack and Jill bathroom. One night, around midnight, he burst into my room, dual-wielding Nerf guns, swearing that his bathroom door had moved on its own. He begged to sleep with me, and once he was under the covers, it took a while for us to calm down. About half an hour later, we heard footsteps downstairs. They were loud, like someone in heavy boots, stumbling around. Strangely, the footsteps didn't cause the wine rack by the staircase to clink, as it normally would when someone walked by it. As we sat there, terrified, we heard the footsteps slowly come up the stairs. Only about 4 steps, before I grabbed my phone and called the house to wake my parents. My dad sprang out of bed, came into my room holding a baseball bat, and found nothing. There was no sign of a break-in, and nothing out of place. The worst experience was when I felt as though something was trying to possess me. I'd just gotten off the phone with my boyfriend and was lying in bed when I suddenly felt a chill spread over my body. My muscles tightened, and my limbs went numb. I heard a deafening, wind tunnel-like rushing sound, though there was no actual wind. I was fully aware but couldn't move, and I felt my face twist into a strange, evil grin that felt unnatural. My hands, which were resting on my stomach, began to drift downward. Inside my head, I fought against it, screaming, F***CKU, and declaring, "This is my body." Finally, it stopped. I jumped out of bed and ran to my mom, who years later admitted that the exact same thing had happened to her. It sounds like a bad horror story, I know, but it was real and terrifying. There were so many incidents that I can't recall them all. I believe there were multiple entities in that house, some good, some malicious. My family nearly fell apart while we lived there. My parents almost divorced, I struggled with severe depression, and my siblings fought their own silent battles. After we moved to Virginia, I researched the property and learned that the subdivision was built on an old corn and soy farm. O'Fallon was once known as a major KKK town, and this farm reportedly had a barn where lynchings took place. Not far from us was Cahokia Mounds, one of the largest Native American village sites in the Midwest. I believe the land carried a heavy imprint of these histories. Even a neighbor mentioned lights turning on and doors opening in their house, though I'm not sure if it was as intense as what we experienced. In the end, I believe that house was a dark place, and I'm grateful we finally left it behind. In 1992, I had the good fortune of reconnecting with my best friend from high school. Patsy and I hadn't spoken in 16 years, but we picked up right where we left off. Our husbands got along, and our kids adored each other, which made it even better. Not long after, Patsy announced they were buying a house on the other side of town. And that house, that's where this story really begins. Initially, Patsy wanted to wait until they'd settled in before I visited, but within weeks, I noticed changes in her. She was always tired from her job as a motel housekeeper, but now, dark circles had formed under her eyes, and she seemed jumpy and on edge. We saw each other almost every day since I babysat her kids, so I noticed her shift quickly. When I asked if everything was all right, she blamed it on stress from the move and some friction with her husband, Jerry. He'd had an affair she hadn't fully forgiven. But I sensed there was more to it. Sometimes, while clearing coffee cups, I'd get troubling impressions, fear mostly. Normally, I keep myself shielded from family and friends, but sometimes, strong emotions slip through. Her feelings seemed tangled, like flashes of anger, fear, and confusion, along with images of an inverted cross and arguments with Jerry. One weekday, the kids were at school and the husbands at work when Patsy showed up at my door. I thought it was odd she'd taken the day off, but she said she'd called in sick. "Are you sick?" I asked, and she replied in a flat, monotone voice. "Maybe in my head." Her tone gave me a chill. We went to the kitchen for coffee and a talk. Once seated, Patsy reached into her purse and took out a new pack of playing cards, still sealed. She laid the deck on the table and lit a cigarette. "Do a reading for me?" she asked. For her to ask this was serious. Patsy had once been a staunch skeptic of anything paranormal, and the first time I'd read for her, she'd only asked to see if I could prove it. But after I described her mother, whom I hadn't yet met, and an argument they'd had, she'd opened her mind, at least when it came to me. She knew I didn't treat it as a game and had seen some of my struggles to control my gifts. Looking at the layout of cards, I asked, "Pats, would you mind if I saw the house?" "You see something," she said, more a statement than a question. I nodded. "Care to share?" "Not yet," I replied. "I could be off, but I think the house might clarify things." She sighed. "If you think it'll help, I want to stop by St. Mary's first." The priest at St. Mary's knew me, and I knew he wouldn't question my asking for holy water and blessed oil. I also knew he'd bless a non-Catholic home for me. I wanted him to do a blessing after I visited. First, I needed to reassure Patsy and maybe get some answers. Walking up to the two-story house, everything seemed in order. Moving boxes neatly stacked in the carport, lawn trimmed. Inside, it was clear they were still unpacking but were mostly settled. I headed down the hall without hesitation. Patsy asked, "Where are you going?" "Your bedroom," I replied. "Val, you've never been here. How do you know where it is?" I gave her a look, and she laughed shakily. "Right? Ask a silly question." "Exactly. The cards told me," I said with a small smile. Patsy just nodded. As soon as I stepped into her room, I froze. "What's with that?" I asked, pointing at an upside-down cross. Normally, I'd consider if it might be a St. Peter's cross, but Patsy was Baptist, and to her, an inverted cross symbolized something dark. "It keeps doing that," she said in a harsh whisper. "Does it now?" I climbed up on her dressing table bench to examine the cross. "This new?" I asked. She nodded. "I think I see the problem. The hanger's at the bottom of the crossbeam, so it might be top-heavy. Get me a little hammer, and I'll fix it for you." I wasn't entirely sure that was the issue, but I really wanted to be wrong about what I was feeling. While she fetched a hammer, I prayed over the cross and blessed the wall with the holy oil. Once she returned, I moved the hanger to the center, rehung the cross, and we proceeded to bless the room together, using the holy water and oil on every opening, including the closet, as I recited the Our Father. We moved through the entire house with Patsy declaring, "This is my home now," and similar affirmations in each room. Finally, we went down to the basement, where I sensed she was waiting. I walked over to an old oak workbench against the wall and paused. "Something like a box used to be here, didn't it?" "Jerry moved it." Patsy nodded, saying that Jerry seemed to have a lot of accidents down there. Objects hitting him out of nowhere, tools moving on their own. I spoke to the room. "I'm here to help. Do you need help?" "That's all I want to do." Patsy was shivering, and I felt the cobwebby tingle I get when a spirit is near. I relaxed my shield slightly, opening just enough to communicate while still protecting myself. A wave of sadness, confusion, and anger washed over me. Suddenly, I saw a haggard woman in a faded floral dress, being bullied by a pot-bellied man. They seemed from the 1930s. He grabbed her arm, striking her with a rolled-up shirt. The vision was so intense that I cried out, describing it to Patsy, then heard the words, "You call this clean?" growled from somewhere deep. I was hit with rapid flashes of his abuse, each one worse than the last, until he was beating her with an umbrella. I flinched with each blow, and tears spilled down my cheeks. Patsy put her arms around me, trying to comfort me. I managed to explain, "It's Jerry she hates. She thinks she's protecting you from him." I could see the alarm in Patsy's eyes, but I reassured her, "Bobby's safe. It's full-grown men she has a problem with. She thinks she's protecting you." In a flash of insight, I understood what I'd always disliked about Jerry. "He hurts you," I said softly. "Not with his fists, but in other ways. She sees that and wants to fight back for you." To this spirit, Patsy's husband seemed like a continuation of her own suffering. Patsy asked what we should do, whether we could help the ghost cross over or if we needed ground rules. I said I believed this was the only spirit in the house and that she was likely behind most of the disturbances. Patsy chose to send her on, saying she wasn't comfortable living with a spirit. I thanked the spirit for trying to protect my friend and expressed sorrow for her suffering. I encouraged her to move on and told her she was free now. Patsy later said she felt an embrace, which I saw. And then, just like that, the spirit faded. The cross in Patsy's bedroom never flipped upside down again. I think that issue was due to a poor hanger placement. We still had the priest come to bless the house, just in case. As for the ghostly woman, I believe she moved on, though every now and then, especially after a heated argument, Jerry would trip on the basement stairs or bump his head on something. And to be honest, I think he might have deserved it. Old Copley Hospital, originally City Hospital back in 1886, began with just 25 beds. By the time it closed in 1996, having moved to a larger facility, it had expanded so much it almost engulfed the original three-story Queen and structure. Though the original building was declared a historic site, the city still plans to demolish it after years of neglect. It's hard to blame them, but it's sad to see a place with so much history awaiting a wrecking ball. The hospital is only a few blocks from where I live now, and I walk past it often. There's something nostalgic about it. Both my children were born there. I always pause as I pass, sometimes walking up close. The old building seems like it deserves better after all its years of service. Rumor has it the hospital is haunted, and many paranormal teams and urban explorers who've snuck in claim they've experienced things. Voices? Apparitions? A doll that moves on its own. Who knows? They might have. Once, near dusk, I had my own scare. I was standing in front of the large doors, looking in, when I saw someone approaching from inside. I froze, wondering if it was a trespasser or an apparition. The dirty glass made it hard to tell, but the figure appeared to be reaching out. Then I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder, and I nearly jumped out of my skin, only to realize it was a cop. It took me a few seconds to understand that the figure was his reflection as he approached from behind. I felt relieved and silly all at once. He asked what I was doing there, and I told him the simple truth. I was just stopping to remember. He seemed amused, struggling not to laugh. I suppose I look about as intimidating as Shirley Temple. I'm not saying the old hospital isn't haunted. If anywhere is, it would be here. Back in 1981, I was there for the birth of my first child. After an emergency C-section, I was sitting up in bed once the anesthesia wore off, debating whether to call for the night nurse. I was incredibly thirsty, but it was late, and the maternity ward was quiet. My sisters are retired nurses, so I have a strong respect for the profession. I didn't want to bother anyone if it wasn't necessary. Just then, a nun entered the room. Even though there's a Catholic church near the hospital, I was surprised to see her in the full traditional habit, complete with wimple and a heavy rosary at her waist. "Hi, sister," I croaked. She smiled, silently poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand. "Why do they never put it within reach?" and handed it to me. I drank it gratefully. The nun took the glass, asked if I felt better, and I murmured, "Much thanks," before laying back on the bed. I remember wondering if she was glowing slightly or if it was just the lighting. She smiled and quietly left. The next day, a couple of nuns dressed in modern knee-length habits stopped by. They seemed to wander the halls, stopping by whenever they saw someone alone. The maternity floor is, after all, one of the few happy floors in a hospital. Curious, I asked about the nun in the traditional habit. They looked puzzled, explaining that no one in their order wore that style anymore, suggesting maybe she was from out of town or a different order. Flash forward 5 years to 1986. I was back at Copley for my second C-section. The night nurse, Karen, was wonderful. She'd sometimes bring me coffee from the nurse's lounge after hours and chat with me when things were slow. She was friendly and easygoing, and when she was on duty, I didn't worry about inconveniencing her. She'd pop in with a cheerful, "I thought you'd never ring," and we'd laugh as though we shared a great joke. Sometimes, if I was awake, we'd walk the halls together, me hunched over like I was 90, pulling my 4-stand, with her strolling by my side. One night, during one of our hallway strolls, I saw the nun again. She was coming from what we called the quiet ward, where women who hadn't had happy deliveries stayed, away from the babies and new moms. Karen and I always turned down another corridor before reaching those doors. It was just too sad. I opened my mouth to greet the nun, but her head was down as if in prayer, so I stopped. But Karen suddenly tightened her grip on my arm. Startled, I turned to look at her. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "What, the nun?" I asked, confused. I wasn't afraid, but Karen looked visibly shaken. She nodded, and we both turned to look back down the hall. Nothing. Just other nurses and orderlies. The nun was gone. Back in my room, Karen brought us strong coffee and explained we had just seen Sister Augustus, the ghost of her, that is, long ago. There had been a horrific train wreck when a passenger train hit an open switch and collided with carboys of acid. The accident happened about a mile from the depot, where 7 boys were playing on a rail car when the train swung onto the siding at full speed. With no time to escape, 2 died, and the others suffered severe burns. Sister Augustus was one of the first to arrive at the scene. She helped the injured, riding with them to the hospital, and despite suffering burns herself, she refused to rest until each patient had been cared for. Infection eventually set in, and she passed away. But over the years, many patients claimed to have seen a nun who tended to them in some way. I like to think of her as a lingering guardian, devoted even in the afterlife to comforting those in need. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Alma, and I'm a mother to 2 sons, John and Zach. At the time of this story, I was married to Paul. Our story begins with a run of bad luck. We were living happily in our cabin home, thinking life was perfect, until a terrible incident changed everything. In one night, we lost our home to an electrical fire. It was devastating, to say the least. We drifted around, unsure where to go or what to do, until we finally settled into a temporary rental. Thankfully, we had homeowners insurance, so we knew it would only be a matter of time before we could find a new place to call home. After looking at several wonderful houses, we found one on Hales Lane, a beautiful yellow ranch-style home. It had 6 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen, a large living room, a laundry room, and an attached garage. There was even a circular driveway and plush green carpeting with a stone fireplace in the living room. Felt like we'd struck gold. On moving day, we were thrilled. We had just started carrying things in when we had our first strange experience. Paul and I were carrying a large painting of the Last Supper into the living room. I thought it would look lovely on the wall, but as we stepped into the room, the glass on the painting suddenly shattered, leaving 5 diagonal streaks across it that looked like claw marks. It was unsettling, but we pressed on. By the time we'd finished moving everything inside, it was dark, so we ordered a pizza and sat down to eat. While we were at the table, the microwave suddenly turned on by itself. It startled us, but Paul reassured the boys, saying it was probably a short in the wiring and that he'd fix it the next day. We decided to settle in for the night. Since we hadn't set up the beds yet, we made pallets in the living room. We were all exhausted, and it didn't take long to fall asleep. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by my alarm clock ringing from a box in the first bedroom. Trying not to wake the boys, I went to turn it off. But when I found the clock, it wasn't plugged in and didn't have a battery. That shook me a little. I took a deep breath and decided to speak to the spirit. "All right, you have my attention. I know you're here, and I'm here too. We need to find a way to live together." The house fell silent after that, and the rest of the night passed without incident. The next day, we got to work setting up our new home, and for a while, things were quiet. But as the days went on, strange occurrences started happening again. A neighborhood boy named Adrian came over one day and asked if he could play with my sons. I invited him inside, but he stepped back, saying he'd wait outside. A few minutes later, he asked, "How can you live here?" Confused, I asked what he meant. He replied, "Don't you know this place is haunted?" I laughed it off, telling him, "Well, nothing's gotten me yet." He just said, "Yeah, not yet." As time went by, it became clear that he was right. One night, I was watching a movie in the living room when I heard one of my sons call out, "Mommy, Mommy." Both boys were supposed to be asleep in their beds, but I went to check anyway. They were sound asleep. I shrugged, thinking one of them might have been talking in his sleep. Just as I turned to leave, I heard the voice again, "Mommy," followed by a giggle. This time, I realized the sound had come from the closet. I forced myself to be brave and opened the closet door. A cold draft hit me and everything looked slightly blurred, but there was nothing there. The next day, my sons told me about a little dark-haired boy who'd been asking them to play. They said he would run down the hallway to the back of the house, stop by the closet door, and then disappear. I found a job close to home and hired a babysitter named Amber to watch the boys while I worked. One night, Amber called me, terrified. She said that the boy's toy dog was chasing her down the hallway. I calmly told her to take the batteries out. Her voice shook as she replied, "I already did." I told her to throw it outside. Sometimes the phone would ring, but when I answered, there would only be static. The silence in the house felt strange, almost muffled, as if I had cotton in my ears. There was a constant eerie feeling, broken only by random objects flying off the shelves, especially when my nieces and nephews came over. My oldest niece, Tosha, seemed to notice it the most. The TV would turn on and off and lights would flicker at night. One evening, as I was relaxing, I heard a knock at the door. When I asked who it was, a voice replied, "Police, ma'am." He explained he'd seen my porch light flashing and thought I was signaling him. I told him it must be a short in the wiring. After he left, I thought to myself, is that all? I half wanted to invite him to stay and witness the shower turning on or the toilet flushing by itself. By then, I'd started getting used to it. Another evening, while making dinner, I reached into a cabinet for a pan and found blood dripping from it. The blood was running down the door and pooling on the floor, but when I checked, there was nothing inside the cabinet to cause it. I cleaned it up and went back to cooking. Later, Paul set his plate on the stove, and suddenly, it flew off and shattered at his feet. Around the holidays, I decided to light a large green candle on the fireplace mantel for a cozy, evergreen scent. As I walked down the hallway, I heard a crash. I turned around to see the candle split in half, with pieces of wax scattered across the floor. One night, the boys and I were staying elsewhere when I got a panicked call from Paul. He'd seen the dark-haired boy running up and down the hallway, calling out to him to come play in the closet. I told Paul to come stay with us for the night. There were many other strange occurrences in that house. Eventually, we decided to sell it. The last time I was there, I was showing the place to a potential buyer. As we stood in the laundry room, the washer and dryer turned on by themselves. She was startled but still bought the house. And so, that's the story of the house on Hales Lane. This is a true account, and as far as I know, the house still stands in Texaco, Illinois. The last I heard, there's another for sale sign in the yard. My parents had a habit of moving every few years, and though us kids were never told why, it became just a fact of life. We got used to being the new kids, and during the in-between times of making friends, my siblings and I were each other's companions. Depending on where we ended up, being friends with my older brothers lasted longer sometimes than others. This particular move set us in the middle of nowhere, 10 miles from town and 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. Luckily, it was the start of summer, so we didn't have to jump right into a new school, though we had little hope of meeting any other kids until then. At the time, 5 of us were still living at home. Kevin was 13, Mitch 12, I was 8, and then there was my younger sister, 6, and baby brother 3. If I wasn't helping Mom with the younger 2, I was usually running with my brothers. I was quite the tomboy in those days. One day, my brothers decided to explore the nearby woods, and of course I tagged along. The woods weren't huge or deep, though they were thick enough that you couldn't see through to the other side. Mitch picked up a stick and was play-fighting trees, shouting "En garde," while Kevin marked trees with chalk so we wouldn't get lost. Aside from the trees and the occasional rabbit, there wasn't much to see. Eventually, I needed to pee, so I stepped away. Glancing up afterward, I caught sight of a house, half hidden in the trees. "Hey guys, there's a house," I called. Kevin asked where, and Mitch said he didn't see anything. "Are you guys blind? It's right there." After a moment, they spotted it too, though it seemed much more camouflaged to them than it did to me. We decided to check it out. Maybe we had neighbors closer than we thought, though we knew we were going in the opposite direction from our nearest neighbor. As we walked toward it, we stepped over a small, trickling stream, barely a foot across. Up close, it was clear no one had lived in the house for a very long time. I can still picture it vividly. A low, single-story structure with a sagging porch and a broken window that looked like a blind eye, so dirty that it was nearly opaque. Here and there, remnants of curtains hung. The house's paint was so faded and chipped it was an unremarkable, ghostly gray. If it seemed sad from a distance, up close it was downright depressing. Mitch dared us to go inside, and though Kevin had his doubts, we couldn't turn down a double-dog dare. Those are childhood rules, after all. After a few shoves, the door creaked open. Inside, it was dim and cool, and the air was thick with the musty smell of a place closed up for too long. We left the door open for light and air. Kevin told me to stay close, and we all agreed not to wander off. Strangely, the house was still furnished, as if someone might walk in and ask us what we were doing there. Quiet as the house itself, we wandered from room to room, opening drawers and cupboards. Each room felt as though something was missing. In some cases, it was obvious. A pale rectangle on the wall where a picture had once hung, or empty kitchen cabinets. In others, it was just a feeling like the house itself was hollow. Kevin guessed that, after the person who lived here passed away, people took anything of value and left the rest to decay. In one room, we found an old letter addressed to a Mrs. Penchant, from her daughter. She apologized that they wouldn't be visiting that year and urged her mother to consider moving in with them now that Daddy was gone many years, and Tom has followed. Saddened, I asked Kevin what that meant. He explained that her husband had died, and her son, Tom, was dead too, leaving her alone. I felt a deep sympathy for Mrs. Penchant. Kevin tried to comfort me, saying she was probably in heaven with her family now, but Mitch had to chime in, saying, "Either that, or she's a ghost waiting to get some little girl." Just then, a small ceramic puppy fell from the mantel. I picked it up, brushing off the dust. It was a tiny beagle figurine, sitting up as if begging. "What a cute little puppy," I said. "You can keep it if you want," Mitch said. I stood on tiptoes to put it back on the mantel, though I was tempted. It was such a cute thing, and I didn't own many pretties. Still, I said, "It's not mine. Old lady's dead. She won't care." "Mitch, that's stealing. It's wrong to steal, even from the dead." I was only 8, and though I didn't fully understand death, I knew it wasn't right to take things without permission. At that moment, Mitch let out a yelp, claiming something pinched him. Kevin laughed, saying maybe it was Mrs. Penchant's ghost giving him a lesson. Mitch, irritated, muttered that ghosts weren't real and that she could suck an egg, or something like that. Just then, he yelped again, his hand flying to his face. "Someone slapped me. I'm not kidding." Even in the dim light, I could see he'd gone pale. Kevin said we should probably leave. Mitch had already bolted for the door, and Kevin was heading out right behind him. I carefully placed the ceramic puppy on a nearby table. "I'm sorry if we upset you," I whispered. As I turned to leave, I felt a light pat on my rear, like a go-on, scoot gesture. That was all it took to get me running too. Once we crossed the little stream, we stopped to catch our breath. Mitch had a bright red mark on his cheek. We walked home quietly, with Kevin and Mitch reminding me not to tell anyone about the house. Later, I found the ceramic puppy in my back pocket. I don't know how it got there, but I like to think it was a gift from Mrs. Penchant. I still have it. To give some background for this story, you need to know that when doctors gave my mother only 3 months to live, two things happened simultaneously. She resolved to prove them wrong, and she became deeply obsessed with her songs. These weren't songs she wrote or had any legal claim to. They were simply songs that had become a part of her. A mix of jaunty ditties, ballads, silly songs, and even operatic pieces. Most were in English, some in Gaelic, and many predated radio. As her health declined, she worried that her songs would die with her, despite the fact that we, her children, had grown up hearing them all our lives. I'm one of 8 kids, so I never understood why she insisted I be the one to learn all her songs. My siblings were far more musical than I was. My 3 sisters were sopranos, 3 of my brothers tenors, and my oldest brother had an incredible range, from bass to high soprano. I, on the other hand, was a low alto at best, singing in the key of Z as my family joked. But if learning her songs was what she wanted, I was determined to do it. So I sang. On her good days, we sang together in duets, sometimes with her accompanying us on the piano. On her harder days, when pain was too much for her to sit up, she'd have me sing at her bedside, correcting me if I missed a note or forgot a word. Her songs became important to me simply because they were important to her. She outlasted her prognosis, and though she never recovered, she didn't let go either. Even after I left home at 16, if I managed to call her from a payphone, she'd ask me to sing her one of her songs. I'd stand there at a wall-mounted payphone, no booth, singing, often with tears running down my face, and almost without fail, someone would tip me a coin or two so I could stay on the line a little longer. She had no idea I was living on the streets back then, believing a lie my father told her that I was staying with friends. Some lies, I suppose, are necessary. Mama passed away in 1986. By then, I was married with a young son and another baby on the way. I wasn't even showing yet. Over the years, I'd managed to create a fragile peace with my father so I could visit her in her last years. Each visit, she'd ask me to sing a song or two her choice like a pop quiz. So it came as a shock when, at her funeral, my father asked me to sing for her one last time. This was the same man who had always referred to my singing as necessary noise that made her happy. I chose to sing Maiden I'm Bara, Oh Danny Boy in Gaelic, the way she had taught me, not only because it was her favorite, but because it was my father's favorite too. When they were courting, she had surprised him by learning the Gaelic words. He could only sing it in English, unable to roll his RS or mimic the brogue. In her last years, she'd hoped that hearing the song might remind him of her love if I'd just sing it every now and then. And so, when he asked me to sing, I almost felt as if I could hear her voice telling me to choose that song. Maybe it was just the wind or my own emotions, but it was so clear I could have sworn she was speaking to me. As I began to sing, I closed my eyes, and though everyone was staring, I tried to focus only on her. In my mind, I could hear my mother's high, clear soprano as it was before her illness, supporting my voice and filling in the notes I could never quite reach. When I finished, murmurs rose from those around me. Did you see that? My God! She sounded like her mother. My father just stared in my direction, his eyes unwavering. At the reception, I finally worked up the nerve to ask my oldest sisters, the twins, see what? I've never had an explanation for their answer, but they both swore they saw Mama standing beside me, singing right along. I live in an old Victorian house from around 1875. Being so old, many people have lived and passed away here over the years. I wouldn't say it's fully haunted, but we often get unusual visitors, random spirits passing through, or sometimes even a relative stopping by to say a quick hello. But what really stands out are what I call the WTH moments. Strange little things that leave me wondering what just happened. These things happen often in my apartment, the one downstairs, and sometimes even in the basement. Some of these moments are too short to be full stories, but I've started keeping track of them. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can relate, or perhaps has an explanation. Here are a few of these strange moments. An unexpected sighting. One afternoon, I was lying down, just relaxing and letting my thoughts wander. Suddenly, I felt a tingling sensation, as if I'd walked into a spiderweb, and got an intense feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes, and there, crouched by my bed with his face level with mine, was a man. He looked to be around 25, with a blue fisherman's sweater and a newsboy cap. He had fair skin with a reddish tone and light-colored hair. His eyes seemed kind but a little confused. Then, in a British accent, he politely asked, "May I help you, Mum?" And just like that, he was gone. I was startled at first, but I didn't feel scared. Sometimes I wonder if he was confused about me being in his bed. Maybe from another plane of existence. Imagine leaning down to get something from under your bed and looking up to see a stranger lying there. The kitchen. One day, I found half of a tiny dress shirt button sitting on the divider of my double kitchen sink. It was like the kind of button that goes on a collar, but just one half. I don't own any shirts with buttons like that, and I definitely wouldn't have left it by the sink. A week later, I noticed a strange, sweet smell in the kitchen. I traced it to the cabinet above the stove, and when I climbed up on a step stool to get a better look, I saw a puddle of black goo on the middle shelf. It was sticky and looked like thick molasses, but I haven't had molasses in years. There was no sign of it dripping from anywhere else, and the rest of the cabinet was spotless. I still have no idea how it got there. The living room. One day, a small yellow plastic ball, the kind made for cats, appeared in my living room. It's about the size of a ping-pong ball and often seems to move from room to room, which I usually blame on my cat. But my cat, Curb, is old and strictly indoors. He doesn't even like going downstairs to the porch with me, so I have no idea how the ball got in or why it moves around so much. Then there are random smells, a whiff of jasmine that lasts only a moment, and sometimes the scent of cherry pipe tobacco, which lingers longer. Neither of these scents has a source, but they come and go just the same. I also have a stack of about 18 books on a table in my living room. These are books whose covers I've designed for various authors, and I keep thinking about whether to display them or just shelve them. In the meantime, they just sit in a stack. Every now and then, though, the book on top changes, as if someone's been flipping through them. Interestingly, the books on my shelves are always left alone. I figure that as long as I don't feel threatened, I'm okay with these random visits and strange happenings. They're just reminders that there's more to life than what we see. I'm going to share 2 recent incidents that happened to me. I don't think they're related, but both were strange in their own ways. The case of the disappearing ironing board. The first incident involves my ironing board. It's nothing fancy, just an old tabletop model about 3 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, made of metal. I've had it for around 18 years, and it was already old when I got it. Usually, it sits against the wall of my hall closet, right below the shelf where I keep the iron. One day, I was preparing for a book signing and decided I should iron the shirt I planned to wear. I was already feeling nervous about meeting a bunch of strangers, worrying about whether anyone would even show up. And, of course, I knew people would judge how I looked. Wrinkles were out of the question. So I went to get the ironing board, but it was nowhere to be found. I moved things around, looked behind and under stuff, but it simply wasn't there. Since I needed to press the shirt, I just ironed it on the kitchen table. That day, I was so jittery that I would have ironed a t-shirt if I had to. The book signing came and went, and about a month later, I was half asleep, stumbling through the living room on my way to the bathroom when, bam! I tripped over the ironing board. What in the world? Where had it been? How did it end up in the middle of the living room? It was one of those "what just happened?" moments that left me scratching my head. The drowning dream. The second event was far more unnerving and happened just a few weeks ago. This spring has been awful for allergies, with the usual medications barely helping. The constant pressure and pain in my head, along with a constant drip of mucus, had me coughing nonstop. I even propped up my mattress at the head to help with drainage at night, hoping I'd get better rest. One night I had a strange dream. I was swimming underwater in dark, murky water, feeling totally disoriented. I couldn't tell which way was up, and I started to panic, feeling desperate for air. Part of me knew it was just a dream. I can't swim in real life, so logically, I shouldn't be underwater. But still, I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were about to burst, and I was panicking, feeling as if I was drowning. Then, I heard someone call my name. It was so loud, like someone was right in my face, that I snapped awake. I sat up, gasping, and began coughing up a huge amount of mucus. It was running from my nose and mouth, a complete mess. My lungs burned from the lack of air. I sat there, forcing myself to breathe slowly, inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth to keep from hyperventilating. Needless to say, I didn't go back to bed that night. I have to wonder, based on how I felt when I woke up and the amount of mucus, it felt like I was literally drowning in my sleep. But was that voice calling my name a product of my subconscious? Or was it one of the friendly spirits, seeing I was in trouble and waking me up? I guess I'll never know for sure. I've been meaning to write about these experiences for years, but for some reason, I kept putting it off. These events happened around 2018. As part of my job in pet care, I often spend long hours at clients' houses while they're away. This particular house, built in the 1940s with an extension added in the 90s, has had its share of strange incidents. One night, my wife and I were sitting in the den, which is part of the newer extension, talking about whether the house might be haunted. Suddenly, some of the ceiling lights in the room began dimming and then getting really bright again. They had individual brightness controls, so each light was acting on its own. Meanwhile, a chandelier and 3 lamps started flickering on and off. Yet the lights in the kitchen stayed perfectly steady. This light show continued for about 20 seconds before everything returned to normal. I've stayed in this house many times since, but the lights have never done anything like that again. It felt like more than just an electrical glitch. On another occasion, my wife was staying alone at the house overnight. She woke up hearing what sounded like 2 male voices talking near the space between the bedroom and bathroom doors. Although the voices were clear, she couldn't make out any words, and there was nobody visible. Not long after that, my brother, who was working for me at the time, was about to leave the house through the mudroom. He saw 2 figures standing by the door, facing each other. He described them as looking like photographic negatives, with inverted colors. They stood there for a couple of seconds before disappearing. The most striking incident happened one morning when I was alone in the master bedroom on the main floor. A loud rainstorm had just started, and as I was listening to the rain beating against the windows, I noticed a woman walking past the half-open bedroom door. She was moving quickly from the foyer toward the kitchen, wearing what looked like a light-colored, knee-length dress. Her hair fell past her shoulders, and her entire figure was washed out in a monochromatic, almost ghostly white. It was clear that she had some purpose as she hurried down the hallway. Knowing right away that this was an apparition, I followed her into the kitchen, but of course, found it empty. I felt an odd sense of excitement after seeing her and immediately called my wife to share the experience. I sensed that what I had witnessed was like a scene replaying from the past, as her dress seemed like it was from some time between the 1940s and 1960s. What I find interesting is that the apparition appeared just as the rainstorm began, which might connect to the often reported link between water and paranormal activity. A few months after I saw this apparition, the house went through extensive renovations. I remember talking to one of the workers, who told me they had pulled a huge amount of old clothing from the attic walls, where it had been used as insulation. Since those renovations, I haven't felt or seen anything unusual in the house. In the summer of 2009, I visited Chicago for work and stayed at the historic Hilton Chicago across from Grant Park. My sister lives in Chicago, and my trip happened to coincide with her bachelorette party. After work on Friday evening, I met up with her and 2 of her friends for dinner. I remember only having 1 glass of wine, knowing that the bachelorette party the next night would likely involve more drinking. After dinner, I went back to my hotel and fell asleep. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was trapped in an elevator that suddenly stopped working. I tried using the intercom to call for help, but instead, a voice started screaming at me. It sounded like multiple voices all shouting at once. Suddenly, I woke up, my heart pounding. I realized that being stuck in the elevator was just a dream, but the loud voices were real. People in the hallway talking loudly as they passed by. Annoyed, I figured it would be hard to fall back asleep. I was curled up in a fetal position on my right side, so I rolled over to my left to check the time. It was 4 a.m. I sighed, feeling a bit anxious about whether I'd be able to sleep again. I rolled onto my back, and that's when I saw him. Standing at the foot of my bed was a man. He wasn't completely solid, but he wasn't fully see-through either. I could see every detail of his face, but there was a faint glow around him. Even today, I can remember exactly what he looked like. Reddish thinning hair, high cheekbones, a faint mustache, and a pointy nose. He was wearing a cut-off Celtics jersey, just standing there staring at me with a slight smile. His smile wasn't overly creepy, but seeing someone just standing there in my room was definitely unsettling. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, though it was probably only 10 or 20 seconds. During that time, my mind was racing. Did someone from the hallway break in? No, this doesn't feel like a real person. Maybe it's a ghost. But if it's my guardian angel, shouldn't he be dressed a bit nicer? Could it be sleep paralysis? Can I move? Why hasn't he disappeared yet? Wait. Maybe he really is here. At that moment, I decided he was real. I sat up and screamed while staring straight at him, and just like that, he faded away, almost as if he dissolved into tiny pixels before my eyes. I sat there, breathing heavily, and looked around the room, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, I looked at the bathroom door, which was slightly open, and there he was again, his face in the dark, staring right back at me. We locked eyes once more, and then, just like before, he faded away. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or even think clearly. I pulled the covers over my head and lay awake for the next hour. Eventually, I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand and called my boyfriend, now husband, but he didn't answer. It was 6 a.m. in New York by then. When I finally got up, I went to yoga in the park with my boss and told her the whole story. Later, I asked 2 hotel employees if they had ever heard any similar stories, but they both said no. Given the hotel's history, I find that hard to believe. When I finally spoke with my boyfriend, he suggested it might have been a remote viewer, someone psychically observing hotel rooms for fun. I don't know what it was, but I know it happened. I've been a bit hesitant to share my stories, as they're not anything too serious, but I decided to go ahead. This experience happened to me in April of 2007, around 8 months after one of my best friends had passed away. At the time, I was 17, living with my mom. I was on the phone with a friend, talking about plans to go out with a group, when I heard what sounded like footsteps behind me. I didn't even turn around, thinking it was just my mom getting something from my dresser. After a few minutes, I got off the phone and headed to the bathroom for a shower. My mom's shower curtain didn't fully cover the shower. It was always a few inches short, so there was a little gap where you could see out. About 10 minutes into my shower, I glanced out and saw what looked like a misty white hand reaching toward the towel hanging on the rack. I know it sounds like it could have been steam or humidity from the closed bathroom, but it wasn't. It clearly looked like a hand. And just a second after I looked over, the towel began to sway gently, as if someone had touched it. There were no vents in that bathroom, so there was no airflow to make it move on its own. I hurried through the rest of my shower, dried off as quickly as I could, and rushed to tell my mom what I'd seen. She laughed and brushed it off, saying it was probably our friend who had passed away, playing around. If you knew him, you'd understand he was always doing something to make people laugh. I laughed along with her and tried not to think too much of it, then got ready to go out with my friends. When I got home later, around 2:30 a.m., I went straight to bed and fell asleep almost instantly. That night, I dreamed about my friend. In the dream, he was trying to tell me something, but his lips were moving without any sound, so I couldn't understand him. He wore a huge, contagious smile, one I'll always remember. He started to walk away, and I tried to follow him, calling after him to get his attention. Suddenly, I could smell his cologne, Chrome Zero. That was his scent. I woke up abruptly and still smelled the cologne, lingering in the room. Then I saw what looked like the back of my friend walking away from my bed. He was almost transparent, dark blue in color, and glowing slightly. I freaked out. Raised in a Baptist household, I'd always been taught that once someone dies, they're gone and don't come back. For a moment, I worried it was something dark pretending to be him. But strangely, I didn't feel threatened, just startled, since I'd never seen anything like this before. He walked toward the door and then vanished right through it. I lay in bed crying for about half an hour before I drifted back to sleep. I woke up around 10 a.m. and went to the kitchen to tell my mom what had happened. Before I could even start, she said, "I had the craziest dream last night about Eddie." Eddie was the friend I dreamed about, and she had been close to him too, as they'd worked together. Then she added, "The weird thing is, all the clocks on the wall and my alarm clock stopped working. All of them were battery operated." I ran back to my room to check my alarm clock, and sure enough, it had stopped too. The strange thing was, each clock had stopped at a slightly different time. The first one stopped at exactly 2:45 a.m., just about the time I'd seen him walk away. Coincidence? Maybe. But for both my mom and I to dream of him on the same night, and then have all the clocks stop, I can't rule anything out. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back in the early 1980s, my ex-husband Ed, our 3-year-old son, and I moved into our first house. It had originally been a one-room schoolhouse. We found old slate chalkboards under layers of wallpaper, and had gradually grown into a sprawling farmhouse as people added on over the years. The place had its quirks, like 2 full bathrooms on the main floor, a large country kitchen, and a smaller galley kitchen in what had once been a mother-in-law apartment. Oddly, someone had removed the doors that once separated the 2 sections of the house, so you could literally do laps around the ground floor. The upstairs was equally unique. The staircase split at the top, each side leading to one of the 2 bedrooms with no hallway in between. Our first night there, I woke up to the sound of someone rummaging through the moving boxes downstairs. I sat up, straining to separate ordinary house sounds from what definitely seemed like movement. I looked at Ed, still sound asleep, then carefully crossed over to my son's room, lifted him up and put him in our bed. Just then, I heard someone downstairs cough. I shook Ed awake. "Someone's downstairs," I whispered urgently. "Go check it out." After a few groggy protests, he muttered that I could check it out myself. That's when something toppled over downstairs, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. If we'd had an upstairs phone, I would have stayed put and called the cops, but this was pre-cell phone days. So, I grabbed my baseball bat and made my way down the stairs, flipping on lights as I went. I hoped whoever it was would take off once they saw the lights. In the living room, I saw that boxes were overturned, their contents scattered, definite proof someone had been going through them. I made my way through each room, leaving lights on as I went, checking every door and window to make sure they were locked tight. Finally, I reached the last room, the bathroom in the old apartment section. I pushed the door open hard, and in the dimness, I saw someone staring back at me. I reached for the light switch and they moved towards me. I screamed and swung the bat with all my might. There was a tremendous crash of shattering glass. I fumbled for the switch again, and as the light came on, I realized I'd smashed a mirror Ed had propped on the toilet tank. I wish he'd told me about it. Feeling foolish, I grabbed the broom and dustpan to clean up the glass. Just then, a loud banging sounded at the front door. The neighbors, hearing my scream, had called the cops. Try explaining that you'd scared yourself silly with your own reflection. At least the officers didn't laugh outright, though they looked less amused when they learned Ed had stayed upstairs the whole time, only coming down when the officers knocked. One officer, Cop A, decided to check out the house to make sure it was secure and took me along. Cop B stayed back with Ed, and I learned later they had their own little chat that left Ed feeling somewhat embarrassed. As we approached the bathroom, I warned, "Be careful. There's glass everywhere." But when we reached it, there was no glass, none at all. The mirror was completely intact, perched on the toilet tank as if it had never been touched. Even the broom and dustpan were sitting in the doorway where I'd left them. I'd definitely heard the glass shatter, and I knew I'd swept up a pile of shards, but there was nothing. After the cops left, I asked Ed where the mirror had come from. He said he'd found it in the basement, then went back to bed. But I went back to take a closer look at the mirror. It was rectangular with wavy glass and a few light spots and clear areas. The frame was ornate, with interwoven vines, leaves, and flowers. It was clearly an antique, maybe from the early to mid-1800s. I wanted to look for a manufacturer's mark or date, but something about it felt strange. I figured that between the night's strange events, the late hour, and the stress of moving, it was better to examine it in the daylight. I closed the bathroom door and went to bed, saying a prayer of protection and silently declaring that anything unkind was not welcome in my home. The next day was uneventful, at least in the weird department. Ed's family showed up to help, which was more of a way for his mother to dictate her decorating preferences, complete with paint samples she insisted were just the colors for the house. She immediately noticed the mirror, and before I could say anything, she began gushing over it. To my surprise, Ed gifted it to her right on the spot. I never saw it again, and oddly, whenever I brought it up afterward, the topic would quickly change. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what that mirror might have brought with it. It's been a while since I've taken the time to write about my experiences. Life with 2 little kids has been hectic, and though I've had encounters with spirits for as long as I can remember, like my mother and other family members, paranormal occurrences have taken a back seat. I've done some research over the years and believe I might have empathic abilities, among other sensitivities that I haven't fully explored or developed yet. Right now, my focus is on my 2 young boys. One is 4.5 and the other is 2.5, and my wife, who is more skeptical about the paranormal, or at least doesn't want to acknowledge it. We've had our home blessed 3 times, which helped stabilize the strange activity to a more manageable level. For a while, it settled into occasional sightings from the corner of my eye or a passing feeling of being watched, which came and went in waves. But recently, things have become stranger, and it's making me wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar. A few months ago, we lost our dog, Reggie, a gentle 150-pound Rottweiler, who was a beloved member of our family. Reggie fell seriously ill at my parents' house, and while he was initially diagnosed with diabetes and pancreatitis, he didn't respond to treatment. A toxicology test showed high levels of arsenic and antifreeze, leading me to suspect poisoning, though I have no proof. Losing Reggie in this way was devastating. What was eerie, though, was that both of my sons began saying they saw Reggie in our house, even though he wasn't there. My older son said he saw a black dog hiding in the closet in our sunroom. When he took me there to show me, I couldn't see anything, but I definitely felt a presence and that sense of being watched. When I asked if it was Reggie, he said, "No, just a black dog." The way he distinguished between Reggie and this black dog gave me chills. My younger son also mentioned seeing the black dog now and then. Thankfully, we haven't had a sighting in a few months. Then, in the past few weeks, an overpowering, putrid smell started emanating from the sunroom. It was the unmistakable smell of rotting flesh, so intense you could hardly breathe. I searched everywhere, even checked the rafters and outside, but found nothing. Being a physician, I know what decay smells like, and this was as if something large and decomposing were right in front of us. Oddly, the smell would drift from one corner of the room to another and disappear entirely after a day or 2. This wasn't the first time we'd encountered mysterious odors in the house, but it's disturbing each time it happens. Sometimes we also catch the smell of incense, the same kind used in the blessings, almost as if it's being mocked. Strangely, my kids aren't bothered by these smells and don't even seem to notice, while my wife and I are affected strongly. What has me most concerned is that my oldest son recently told us he didn't want to go home because it's haunted. And my younger son chimed in, "Yes, it's a demon." We've never discussed anything paranormal with them, and I've never used those words around them. I don't even watch paranormal shows with them around, so I can't imagine how they came up with this. My 2.5-year-old has also been saying, "We're going to die," almost as if it's a joke. He's usually fearless, so it's unsettling to hear this from him. My older son, who has some sensory issues and is more easily startled, otherwise acts like a normal kid. They don't talk to or interact with anything that isn't there, so it's concerning that they're now picking up on things. Additionally, my wife and I have been arguing more often than usual, mostly over trivial matters. There's an odd sense of frustration and hopelessness hanging around the house, like a feeling of being stuck in a rut. While I know some of this can just be the exhaustion of parenting, it's strange that it coincides with the kids' talk of hauntings and a demon. I've also been experiencing vivid, unusual dreams, some about places I've visited, and others that I can't recall fully but leave a lingering feeling. Occasionally, I see shadows out of the corner of my eye or catch glimpses of orbs or shadowy shapes right in front of me. Sometimes, when I sit alone in the sunroom, I get an odd sense, like a thought that people once played with a Ouija board in that room. It's just a fleeting impression, but it's hard to shake. At this point, I'm not sure what to do. Part of me wants to invest in an EMF detector and start investigating, while another part of me thinks we might need another blessing. What really unsettles me is that my kids seem to be sensing and recognizing something, and I don't know what it means. This happened about 3 or 4 years ago. I was home alone while my parents were out picking up dinner, and my siblings were away at college. I was sitting on the ground floor on my laptop in the living room, where my back was to the wall. From that spot, I had a clear view into the kitchen, thanks to the wide, doorless doorway. I could also see part of our drawing room and the base of the staircase through another large, open doorway. The lamp near the bottom of the stairs usually casts enough light for me to make out anyone coming up or down without needing to look directly. That night, I was casually browsing online while one of our cats, Velvet, curled up on the cushion beside me. I started hearing loud noises from upstairs, but I brushed them off as our other cat, Shadow, or maybe the wind rattling the house. Then, I thought I heard footsteps on the stairs, like someone was stepping down a few steps and then pausing. I ignored it again, assuming I was either imagining things or that it was Shadow moving around. Both of our cats are extremely skittish around anyone outside of our immediate family, so since Velvet was calmly beside me, I didn't think anything of it. But then, in my peripheral vision, I saw a black figure descending the last few steps. Usually, with the lamp on, I'd be able to see details and colors, but this figure was just a smooth, solid black shape. At the exact same moment, Velvet sprang up, faced the stairs, and started hissing, her fur standing on end. I'd only seen her react like this once before, years earlier, when a man knocked repeatedly on our door while I was home alone. That man had actually gone on to rob a house down the street, using his knocking to make sure no one was home first. He was eventually caught, which is how we knew he'd been scoping out empty houses. Startled, I quickly turned to face the stairs, but all I caught was a glimpse of the black figure turning toward the right, heading out of sight. Velvet stayed beside me, hissing as she followed something with her eyes, tracing it as it seemed to move toward the kitchen. I could actually hear the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps on the wood floor. But just when someone should have entered the kitchen, the footsteps stopped. Velvet stopped hissing and immediately calmed down, curling up as if nothing had happened. After a few minutes of silence, I mustered up the courage to check the hallway and search the house, but I didn't find anyone. I told my parents about the incident, but they didn't take it seriously. The strangest part was that upstairs, some large pieces of furniture had clearly been moved. Desks, a shelf full of supplies, things that were heavy enough that I couldn't imagine them shifting on their own. Each was moved about a foot from its usual spot, which seemed to explain some of the loud noises I'd heard earlier. The black figure was unusual because even though I should have been able to make out more details in the light, I only saw a perfectly smooth, solid black silhouette, no features or textures like clothing or hair. Coupled with Velvet's reaction, the sudden disappearance of the figure, and the inexplicably moved items, I'm certain I encountered a ghost that night. Judging by Velvet's reaction, it didn't feel like a friendly one. Since then, Velvet has never reacted like that again. I still occasionally hear someone walking up and down the stairs, but I believe it's a different presence. Those footsteps sound steady and natural, unlike these which were cautious, as though trying not to be noticed. In my late teens, I decided to write down what I could remember of certain events from my childhood. Those notes have been invaluable, helping me recall details I might otherwise have forgotten. Unfortunately, I was only able to find a page and a half of these notes. There were originally 3, I believe. The missing parts affect the second section, but I'll do my best to fill in the gaps. Just before I turned 5, my family, my mom, dad, twin brother, younger sister, 2 dogs, and a cat, moved into what would be our 4th home. We'd originally lived in Chicago, but this house, like our previous one, was in the suburb of Oak Brook, on Concord Drive in a neighborhood called Brook Forest. The area was made up of winding roads and large houses on spacious acre lots. Built in 1967, the house had a colonial revival style, with gray-painted wood panels and maroon shutters. The main 2-story section adjoined a 1-story wing that included a den, enclosed patio, and garage. I vividly remember the day we first went to look at the house. My parents had nearly finalized the purchase, and they wanted to bring my siblings and me to see it. A woman greeted us at the door, holding a young child, and she had a worn, sorrowful expression that left a lasting impression on me. I later learned she was selling the house after her husband had died suddenly of a heart attack, apparently in the house. Naturally, we kids were eager to explore the bedrooms. The 2nd floor had 4 of them. The master bedroom, my sister's room, a room that was initially my mother's sewing room, later my brother's, and a bedroom my brother and I would share at first. Not long after we moved in, this would have been late 1971 or early 1972, I began hearing, while lying in bed at night, the faint sounds of a man and a woman arguing. This went on every night for several months. Sometimes I even got out of bed and walked down the hall to my parents' room, only to find them fast asleep. The voices were angry, yet muted, and I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like hearing an argument muffled through a layer of water. Oddly, I'd sometimes hear my parents downstairs while the argument continued upstairs, with the sound seeming to come from the direction of the master bedroom. Being so young, between 4 and 6, I wasn't frightened by the voices. They just became a regular part of my nights, as routine as brushing my teeth and saying goodnight to my parents. My only theory is that I was somehow hearing a replay of an argument between the sad woman who sold the house and her deceased husband. If that's true, it's strange that I seem to be hearing a residual argument, with one of the participants still alive at the time. It makes me wonder if intense emotions can somehow saturate a place, leaving an imprint that lingers. Around the same time that I started hearing the voices, another nightly phenomenon began, one that lasted for about 3 years. Every night, within a few minutes of lying down, my bed would begin to gently rock, as if an unseen hand was trying to lull me to sleep. This happened no matter where I was, even if we were on vacation in another state. It continued even if someone else was in the bed with me. One time, on a family road trip to Colorado, we stopped overnight at a Holiday Inn. Since my siblings and I were young, my parents would always get a room with 2 queen-sized beds. On that trip, I shared a bed with my mom, and once she fell asleep, the gentle rocking began as usual. I remember glancing over the edge of the bed and seeing the comforter swaying in time with the rhythm. My mom never stirred. Much like the voices, I found the nightly rocking strange, but without any frame of reference, I accepted it as normal. Odd though it was, it never frightened me, so I never felt compelled to mention it to my parents. Sadly, they both passed away a few years ago, so I'll never know if they ever suspected or noticed anything. One other event at Concord Drive seems connected to the nightly bed rocking. One night, I fell asleep to the rocking as usual, but woke up in the middle of the night. Across the room, my dresser stood with a small lamp on it, which was often left on overnight. When I opened my eyes, I was startled to see a completely black figure standing beside the lamp. The figure, which appeared to be female, reached under the lampshade and turned out the light. It looked like a pitch-black cutout against the room's dim light, with no details or features, almost as if it absorbed the light around it. I could make out a distinctly female outline, including the shape of hair and a thin arm, and it seemed to be wearing a close-fitting garment that extended to the wrist. But instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of calm. There was something motherly and reassuring about the figure, and the way she turned off the light struck me as an act of kindness. After she left, I simply went back to sleep. Recently, I've wondered if the rocking and the black figure were somehow connected to my birth family. My twin brother and I were adopted as infants, and our younger sister was also adopted 3 years later. A few years ago, my brother and I reconnected with our birth mother, and it's been a truly amazing experience. She's now a big part of our lives, and through her, I've discovered a family history I never knew. I found out that both of her parents, my grandparents, passed away tragically young. I sometimes wonder if the figure I saw and the nightly rocking were connected to the grandmother I never got to know. It could explain why the rocking always felt comforting and why the figure seemed so caring. This concludes my experiences at Concord Drive, which serves as part 1 of this account. In 1977, when I was 10, my family moved to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and part 2 will cover the paranormal experiences I had there. I'd love to hear thoughts from the YGS community about these events. It would be interesting to know if others have experienced something similar or have perspectives I haven't considered. I've been meaning to share these experiences for a while now. These paranormal events happened between mid-1991 and early 1993, when I lived in an apartment on York Street in Elmhurst, Illinois. The building has since been renovated and now houses an Irish restaurant and bar. I kept detailed notes during my time there, which has helped me remember the correct order of events. Memory can be tricky, especially after so many years. This will be a lengthy account, as it covers multiple incidents over 2 years. My wife Julie and I, we weren't married yet when we first moved into apartment B on July 1st, 1991. We were both in our early 20s. It was a charming 1-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors, leaded glass windows, high ceilings, and original 1930s fixtures. The place had a lot of personality and a sort of Tudor style that's hard to find in newer buildings. Built in 1926, it had once housed the Public Service Company of Northern Illinois on the first floor. By the time we lived there, the ground floor was occupied by a German market called the Heidelberg, and in the basement was a restaurant, the Ratskeller. During our first few months, Julie and I often heard muffled voices and doors slamming, and we had the odd feeling that we weren't alone. Friends who visited us also commented on feeling uneasy, especially in the main hallway. One friend, Greg, refused to enter the apartment alone after he'd come in to use the bathroom during a visit. After about 5 months, most of the noises and unsettling feelings faded, though occasionally something strange would happen. The first major incident took place in mid-July, shortly after we moved in. It was around 2 a.m. when Julie woke me up, whispering, "Do you see it?" I looked where she was pointing and saw a bluish, slightly glowing mass on the wall below the bedroom window. It moved slowly, almost like a thick liquid, and gave off an intense energy that made it hard to breathe. I quickly turned on the light, and the shape vanished. Afterward, Julie told me she had seen a spinning blue object above her when she woke up. We pieced together that as soon as she spoke, it may have shifted to the wall where I saw it. I wondered if it was trying to materialize but was interrupted by our voices. It remains one of the strangest experiences I've ever had, and nothing quite like it ever happened again. A few days later, I was home alone when I heard a loud, shrill cry, like a baby crying, in the hallway. I immediately went to check, but the hall was empty and silent. This was the only time I heard that particular sound. Not long after, another unsettling occurrence began. Around 2:30 a.m., Julie and I were startled awake by loud banging sounds coming from our stereo speakers. The stereo was off, yet the sound pulsed through the speakers, getting louder and louder, while the red monitor light on the receiver pulsed in time. The only way to stop it was to unplug the stereo. This happened several more times, always around 2:30 a.m. I even took the receiver in for repairs, but they found nothing wrong. Afterward, we made a habit of unplugging the stereo each night before bed. The most striking incident happened early on August 17, 1991, around 4:03 a.m. I was on the back porch with my neighbor Jim, who lived in apartment A. We were chatting when we heard a loud noise directly below us. It sounded like the back door of the market slamming, followed by something heavy dropping. Thinking it was an employee cleaning up, I leaned over the railing and saw a man below us. He appeared to be wearing a butcher's apron, with only his legs visible from below the knees. He swayed slightly but looked solid. I told Jim it was someone from the market, but he reminded me that the store was closed, and it was well after 4 a.m. When we looked back down, the man was gone. We went downstairs to investigate and found the doors securely locked. We walked around the building, but the place was empty and still. As we returned to the balcony, the door to the apartments, which we had propped open, suddenly slammed shut with great force. There was no wind that night, making it all the more bizarre. After this incident, I began researching the property's history. We discovered that before the current building was constructed, it had been the site of Heinemann's meat market. Edwin Heinemann, the original owner, had died on December 26, 1906, after falling down the outside stairs and breaking his neck. His appearance matched the figure I'd seen that night. The sounds we heard may have been a residual replay of him going through the back door of his shop. Another strange event happened on January 8, 1992. Again at 2:30 a.m. Julie and I woke to the loud sound of tires screeching, as if a car were burning rubber right below our window. The sound filled the room, accompanied by a thick smell of burning rubber. Yet when we looked outside, there was no car, and the parking lot was empty. The smell lingered for over half an hour, even though all the windows were closed. The next day, we found no tire marks anywhere. Around the same time, our neighbor Jim and his wife had their own odd experience. For 3 consecutive nights, an old wind-up alarm clock in their closet would ring at exactly 2:30 a.m., even though they hadn't set it. I told them about the phantom tire screeching, and we realized both incidents began on the same night at the same time. Other smaller but equally baffling incidents happened throughout our stay. One day, a misplaced hotel reservation slip flew out from the bottom of a stack of papers, as if someone had lifted it up for me. On another occasion, I heard a voice coming from the phone, saying, "Please hang up and try again." The phone had been out of service since that morning, but when I hung it up and picked it up again, it worked fine. I later found out that one of the building's past occupants had been an operator named Amanda Heinemann, who may have tried to communicate in her old way as a switchboard operator. We also captured some strange images. In one photo of me on the balcony, a wispy white shape appeared by my cheek, along with a green, segmented line that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. In another photo, a bright orange line zigzagged around a parked truck, giving off a faint, electrical-looking glow. Both anomalies remain unexplained, and none of the other photos from that roll showed anything unusual. Over the years, other residents and friends also reported eerie occurrences, including the appearance of a man on a nearby roof, who disappeared right before their eyes. This sighting occurred on the spot where a blacksmith shop once stood, possibly tying it to the historical nature of the building. In the final months before we moved out, things grew quiet. It seemed the activity came in waves, each episode unique and inexplicable. I still wonder if any of it was connected to the building's rich history or the people who once lived and worked there. In 2004, Julie and I went back to the building for lunch in what had once been our apartment. It had changed completely, yet the memories and the mysteries remained. My parents built our house on Ron-Sue Lane in St. Charles, Illinois, and we moved in a year after I was born in 1970. Since there were no previous owners and no known deaths on the property, there was no reason to expect anything unusual. The land had once been a wooded area surrounded by farmland, and while Native American tribes had lived along the Fox River in our town, I don't know of any history that directly ties them to our land. Even so, I believe that something haunted or eerie took root in that house, and worsened after we played with a Ouija board. I'm 45 now, and despite owning 3 homes myself, including 2 over 100 years old, I've never felt anything unusual in any of them. My own kids have grown up with no fear of the dark, no nightmares, and no signs of paranormal experiences. Yet I still have nightmares about my childhood home and occasionally dream that my parents have offered to gift it to my husband and me, worth nearly $500,000 in my dreams. In those dreams, I can't tell them why I want to turn down the house, knowing it would hurt them, but the idea of living there again is something I'd never consider. My earliest unsettling memory is from when I was 5. The basement was large, about 1,500 square feet, with a smooth concrete floor and a few supporting metal beams scattered around. I'd ride my tricycle down there in the mornings before my half-day kindergarten, racing around and weaving through the beams in the open, brightly lit space. But one morning, something changed. I stopped in front of an old black storage chest. My mom had told me it was from a relative who used it to bring belongings from Lithuania. My dad had drilled holes in it to prevent anyone from accidentally getting locked inside, as my older siblings often played in it. I'd never thought much of the chest until that day. As I stopped in front of it, I suddenly felt like there was a man inside, watching me. I felt his gaze through one of the drilled holes, and when his eye moved to follow me, I froze, terrified. I tore across the basement, up the steps, and into the kitchen. From that moment on, I never felt safe in the basement, a fear that still lingers nearly 40 years later. Not long after, my parents transformed the basement into a family room with a pool table. Sometimes at night, we'd hear the sound of pool balls rolling and clacking together, echoing up through the air vents from the basement. I knew no one was down there, yet something was making those balls move. Around the time I was 7, my sister received a Ouija board for her birthday. This was in the mid-1970s, and while I don't remember every detail, my mom recently retold the story. I'd asked my family if they thought our house was haunted. My sister and I both said yes, while my parents were shocked and insisted it wasn't. One rainy afternoon, we were all in the den. My mom was lying on the couch reading, and we were playing with the Ouija board on the carpet next to her. We asked silly questions and accused each other of moving the planchette. Eventually, boredom set in and someone asked my mom to ask a question. She agreed, half asleep, and casually asked the board, "What is my father's name?" expecting it to spell out her father's first name or the last name we all knew. But instead, it began to spell out her father's Lithuanian last name, a name that was spelled and sounded entirely different from the name we knew. None of us kids knew it, and she hadn't mentioned it in years. She realized what it was spelling and quickly ended the game, sending us outside as the rain let up. Despite my sister's warning that the Ouija board might invite bad spirits, I was fascinated by it. I even played alone sometimes and had a ghost friend named 3. I don't remember much about what I asked him, probably questions about school or friends, but one day, I decided to find out if my sister was right about the board's dark side. I asked, "Are you from heaven?" And it answered, "No." Then I asked, "Are you from hell?" And it answered, "Yes." Panicked, I shoved the board away and told 3 never to contact me again unless he was in heaven. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. The most intense experiences happened when I was around 16. One night, I was finishing up homework in my room with our dog, a standard poodle, lying next to me. It was just before 10 p.m., and my dad was the only other person still awake in the house. As I started to doze off, I heard a scratchy, rustling noise across the room, near my bookshelf. It sounded like a mouse running on paper, similar to the sound of my pet gerbil years before. But I hadn't had a gerbil in ages. I turned on my lamp and looked over, but there was nothing there. I turned off the light and lay back down, only for the noise to start up again, this time at the foot of my bed. I turned the light back on and checked again, but still found nothing. The sound moved, now coming from beside my bed, where I'd left my homework. When I found nothing in the papers, I turned off the light again. Then, I heard the sound under my bed. I turned on the light but was too scared to look under the bed myself, so I pushed the dog off and nudged her to investigate. She didn't seem to find anything, and if there had been a mouse, she would have chased it. I turned off the light and lay down again. Then my bed began to shake softly at first. I wasn't sure if it was my dog's tail or my own heart pounding, but the shaking continued. I placed my glass of water on the mattress, and sure enough, the water sloshed back and forth. I jumped up and yelled for my dad. When he arrived, the shaking had stopped. I told him what happened, so he stayed with me for about 15 minutes. When nothing happened, he left, taking the dog out one last time. As I lay in bed, the light from the hallway spilling in, it was quiet for about 5 minutes. Then the bed started shaking again. I bolted out of the room just as my dad came back inside. I ended up sleeping in my sister's room that night. A few weeks later, the bed shook again, but this time without the scratchy sounds. My sister had told me that praying would keep me safe, so I said the Lord's Prayer in my head, but the shaking didn't stop. Saying the prayer aloud, the shaking finally stopped halfway through. I remember feeling more frightened by it stopping because it made me think that whatever was causing it was something dark or evil. It happened once more after that, and then it never returned. My parents moved out and sold the house 20 years ago. Occasionally, I search online to see if any of the current owners have mentioned anything strange. So far, I haven't found anything. 30-some years ago, I was friends with a man named Hank. That's not his real name, but it'll do for this story, which still puzzles me to this day. Hank was a giant of a man, about 6'6" and nearly 400 pounds. His size and presence could be intimidating, and very few people would dare to cross him. But for those he considered friends, Hank was as soft-hearted as they come. A true marshmallow on the inside. One night, we were sitting at a local bar, and Hank confided that he thought his new place was haunted. How so? I asked, expecting it to be the setup to one of his infamous jokes. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized he was serious. There was a hint of something like fear, the kind that comes from being afraid people won't believe you, might think you're crazy, or that you're just making things up. He struggled with whether or not to go on, so I laid my hand on his and promised, "I'll believe you. Honest." He began with the typical haunting signs: doors opening and closing on their own, footsteps, objects being moved. Annoying, but not particularly alarming. Then he mentioned the part that had really unnerved him. A stranger's voice speaking directly to him, saying it was going to kill him. I asked if anything had actually tried to harm him, and he shook his head no. My opinion was that either it couldn't or it wasn't strong enough yet. Either way, it didn't sound friendly, and it had to go. We agreed I'd come over the next day to check out his place. In the meantime, I suggested he stay with his mom until we could figure it out. Hank lived in a townhouse, and the other half was unoccupied, so my hope that he was overhearing a neighbor was quickly dashed. We walked through the townhouse, and I paid close attention to how doors and objects reacted to Hank's movements, considering his size. But there was nothing, no strange vibrations, no sudden drafts. Hank told me he'd heard the voice several times, usually in the early hours while watching TV. I checked around for vents or anything that might carry sound from somewhere else, but still found nothing. The house felt fairly normal, if a bit statusy. By early evening, I was starting to wonder if Hank might need a medical checkup instead, but I knew from experience that malevolent spirits could be crafty. We spent the evening joking around, cracking awful jokes, and watching comedies on TV, staying away from horror to keep our minds calm. Just after midnight, amid tired yawns, we heard a door slam, loudly. We walked through the house, checking every room, and saw all the doors were as we'd left them, except his closet door, which was now wide open. As we watched, it slowly swung shut on its own, and then his bedroom door slammed shut behind us. My heart pounded as I forced myself to say, "Stop it, right now. You want my attention? You've got it." Silence. I opened the door, and clinging to Hank's hand, we walked back to the living room. I was desperately searching for a rational explanation. All the windows were closed, the closet door had shut too slowly to create any vacuum, and there was no heavy traffic outside. Hank offered me a beer, something we decided to avoid that evening, but I declined and asked for a coffee instead. He looked relieved and asked, "Come with me?" Like a scared kid. He didn't need to ask twice. I didn't want to be alone either, even making him stand outside the bathroom door while I was in there. Not long afterward, I started to feel a sudden chill, despite the room being comfortable moments before. I asked Hank if he'd had the house blessed, mentioning a priest I knew who would do it. It seemed the spirit didn't like that idea, because more doors began slamming. Then we both heard it. A deep southern voice said, "I'm going to kill you. Nig asterisk asterisk asterisk." We both jumped up, and Hank grabbed my arm as if he was ready to scoop me up and run if needed. The voice sounded like it was just inches away, but there was no one there. Not even the faintest hint of a shadow or mist. "So, you've got a problem with black folks, do you?" I said, trying to sound brave, though my voice was shaking. The air grew even colder, and doors began slamming all over the place, as if the kitchen was being torn apart. We didn't stay to find out. We grabbed our things and left as quickly as we could. The next day, while Hank slept on my couch, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the priest I'd mentioned. The second was to a friend at the local paper, asking him to search for any history of violence or deaths at Hank's address. My third call was to Enrica, a psychic friend, hoping she could guide us to someone with more expertise. Unfortunately, she wasn't available. We arranged to meet the priest the next day, but while I was at work, Hank decided to return to the townhouse alone. I still don't know why he went back, especially considering how frightened he'd been. Later that day, he was found lying at the foot of the stairs, having fallen and broken his neck. To this day, I can't be certain. Was it just a tragic accident? Or had he been pushed? Did my fear that night somehow fuel whatever spirit haunted him, giving it enough strength to hurt him? I'll never know. My friend at the paper found no records of anything happening at that address, so I still don't know who or what that bigoted, hateful spirit was. In the comments section of "I'm going to kill you," some people asked if I'd ever felt Hank's presence since his mysterious death all those years ago. I promised to share what I've experienced, though I'm not entirely sure how much of it was paranormal and how much may have been wishful thinking. Grief and guilt can blur lines, and in those days I carried both. I felt responsible for Hank's death, as though I could have somehow protected him better. The first time I felt Hank's presence was the day he died. Hank, as I mentioned before, was a towering figure, 6'6" and close to 400 pounds, while I'm barely 4 feet 10 inches. He'd often joke about our height difference and, just to tease, would palm my face the way you'd hold a basketball. He thought it was hilarious, and I had to admit it was funny in a ridiculous way. That night, though, as I sat alone, quietly crying and apologizing for not being there, I felt that big hand covering my face, and I heard him call me Lil Bit, his nickname for me. It gave me comfort. I wanted to believe he didn't blame me even if I did, and that somehow he was okay. I felt Hank's presence again during the memorial fundraiser we held for him at the bar. We'd set his usual spot with a glass of his favorite beer and black streamers framing his picture, which faced outward toward everyone else. Flowers and candles surrounded it as people added their own tokens of respect. There was an Irish song Hank used to ask me to sing sometimes when the bar was quiet. It's called Sewell a Run, pronounced Shu La Rune. And while the verses are in English, the chorus is in Irish. I'm not much of a singer, but I'd sing it just to make him happy. I don't remember who first suggested I sing it that night, but several people joined in, saying how much Hank would like it. So I did. I looked over to where he used to sit, and for just a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw him there, slightly turned toward me, that easy smile on his face, nodding as if to say, "Yeah, that's it." I knew it wasn't just his picture. It was facing the opposite way. Felt like, somehow, he was right there. About a month later, his family decided to clear out his townhouse to put it up for sale. His mom couldn't bring herself to do it, and I understood. They asked me to go with his older brother. I hadn't told them about my suspicions, that maybe Hank's death had been the result of a spirit, or that I thought his place was haunted. That's not something you tell grieving family members. But at the same time, I couldn't let them go in completely unaware, so I agreed to go along. The brother was bringing 2 friends to help, which made me feel better. I wanted this to be in, out, and done. It turned out to be almost anticlimactic. There were no slamming doors, no ominous voices. Nothing, except Hank's brother giving me a curious look as I insisted we work in pairs. I did feel Hank's presence, though, especially as we sorted through his things. The kitchen was chaotic, with drawers yanked out, some dumped on the floor, and cabinets left open in disarray. Other than that, it was just a quiet, if somber, cleanup. I felt relief when we'd packed everything up. As the others carried boxes down the stairs, I followed behind, glad to be leaving. I didn't see what happened next, but I heard Hank's brother shout, "Whoa, that was weird." Once we were outside, the door locked behind us. He explained that he'd felt himself stumble on the stairs, but, just as suddenly, felt like something had steadied him. Maybe it was just his imagination, or maybe it was Hank, looking out for us one last time. This second part of my childhood paranormal experiences covers a few incidents I documented after my family moved from the Chicago suburbs to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. Some of the notes I wrote down in my late teens about these experiences have been lost, but I've done my best to fill in the gaps. A conversation with my brother on Christmas Eve 2016 helped confirm details of an incident involving him. We lived in an area of the island called Sea Pines Plantation, a major tourist destination with residential neighborhoods, condos, villas, golf courses, and bustling marinas. My parents bought a one-story, modern home on a quiet cul-de-sac called Wildwood Court, nestled in a heavily wooded area in a neighborhood known as Greenwood Forest. Our yard was surrounded by pines, live oaks, and azaleas, creating a peaceful, almost secluded setting. The house had 3 bedrooms, and my brother and I shared one. I was 10 when we moved in, and it wasn't until my brother and I turned 13 that I experienced anything that seemed paranormal. Our age at the time, I believe, may have played a role in what transpired. The bedrocking phenomenon I described in part 1, which had been part of my nightly routine in our old house, stopped once we moved. I suspect that was because in the new house my bed was the top bunk of a built-in bunk bed that couldn't rock. One peaceful, sunny summer afternoon in 1980, shortly after my 13th birthday, I was sitting on the living room couch reading. To my left was the kitchen, separated from the living room by a large open space above a built-in banquette. This spot offered me a clear view through the kitchen to the back door, which had a large glass pane allowing a view of the small gated utility area outside. Suddenly, I heard the back door open. Startled, I looked up to see the handle turning and the door swinging halfway open, as though someone were coming in, and then swiftly clicking shut. The door tended to stick, so closing it required extra effort. The sounds, the creak and snap of the door handle and the click of the door as it closed, were exactly like what I'd hear if someone were returning home. But there was no one there. I remember it was a bright, calm day, with only the occasional breeze. My parents returned from a jog about 15 minutes later, but they didn't have any explanation. Still winded from their run, they didn't seem to give it much thought. Just a week later, I was alone again, reading on the same couch around 9 in the evening. Our family cat, Tigger, was dozing on my lap when we both suddenly turned our heads at the sound of a loud metallic clatter coming from the kitchen. I rushed to investigate and found the silverware drawer dangling from the counter, its contents strewn on the floor as if someone had yanked it open and then let go. Silverware that remained in the drawer was jumbled and piled toward the front. I've always suspected there might have been a connection between these incidents and the intense emotions I was feeling at the time. My brother, sister, and I attended a private school where conformity was highly valued. For boys, the uniform was Izod shirts, khakis, and neatly trimmed hair. My long hair and rock band t-shirts, my favorite featured the Black Sabbath Heaven and Hell album cover, made me a target for criticism, and I often felt like an outsider. I would joke in class as a way to cope with feeling ostracized. Beneath that, though, was a lot of pent-up frustration and anger. In hindsight, I believe the combination of these intense emotions, along with the physical changes of puberty, may have triggered some kind of poltergeist activity. In psychical research, there are countless cases of teens going through intense emotions and physical changes experiencing psychokinetic events. These 2 incidents, the door opening and the silverware drawer crashing, both occurred while I was reading, a time when I was deeply focused and mentally elsewhere. I've read that a distracted state of mind, or being disengaged from the world, is often conducive to paranormal phenomena. My notes on further incidents are missing, but I recall a few other minor occurrences involving a sliding glass door that led to the back porch. On at least 2 occasions, I remember locking the door before bed, only to find it unlocked and slightly open a few minutes later. This lock was stiff and needed a firm press, so it was strange that it would unlock and open on its own. Another strange thing about this door was that, for over a year, 3 toads would appear outside of it every night at twilight, sitting in a perfect line. I'd bring them bits of lettuce and pat their heads, and I even named them King Edward, Prince Rupert, and something else I've since forgotten. Their nightly appearance always felt a bit magical. They seemed almost like they were on the verge of speaking, as if they should have been wearing smoking jackets and sipping port. I doubt they had anything to do with the door opening, but it was unusual enough that I thought it worth mentioning. My mom remembered them too. The last major experience was my brother's. On the night in question, the rest of the family, my parents, sister, and I were at a school event, leaving him home alone. We were both 13 at the time. When we returned around 9 p.m., he met us at the door, visibly upset. He explained that about an hour after we'd left, he'd been watching TV in the living room when he began hearing a loud, rhythmic breathing sound. He said it seemed to come from everywhere and was just as loud in every room of the house. Over the years, I had tried to attribute the breathing to a refrigerator noise, reasoning that a jittery 13-year-old alone at night might have misinterpreted the sound. However, when we talked about it again in 2016, my brother was adamant that the sound had been consistent in volume in every part of the house. If it had been the refrigerator, the noise likely wouldn't have carried so evenly throughout the entire house. Reflecting on it now, I'm more inclined to think it was connected to the other incidents or some other paranormal source. Looking back, I wish I'd kept a detailed diary of those days, as I likely would have documented more small events that might have painted a fuller picture. But as a young teen, I was more interested in music than in tracking strange occurrences. A house my friend Lori and I used to clean back in 2005 has been on my mind lately. It was one of those charming old two-story homes that appear small from the outside but feel surprisingly spacious once you're in. The house, set on the edge of town, had a sprawling lawn filled with trees and a cobblestone circular drive complete with lawn jockeys, giving it an air of historic elegance. Inside, the house was equally impressive. We always entered through the back, carrying our cleaning supplies through the mudroom and into the kitchen. Here's a bit of the layout. The kitchen had 3 doors. One led to the basement, another to the back stairs, narrow and steep servant stairs, and the third opened into a hall. From the hall, you could go left into the formal dining room, and further along was the living room, followed by an arched doorway leading to the foyer. The foyer was as large as a bedroom and boasted a grand staircase to the second floor. On the other side of the foyer was another hall with a series of rooms. First a study, then a half-bath, and finally the door back to the kitchen. Upstairs, there were bedrooms and 2 baths. The master bedroom had its own bath, while another bath was shared between 2 bedrooms with adjoining doors. Across the hall were 3 guest rooms, and at the hall's end, 2 doors, one leading to the servant stairs and another to the attic. Our cleaning duties didn't extend to the attic, but we cleaned almost every room, many of which featured ornate fireplaces and antique decor. On our first day, Lori and I quickly divided the chores as we always did. I would start with the upstairs and she'd begin in the kitchen. Over time, a series of small but strange events left me convinced that the house on Prairie Street was not only haunted but very active. Week 1, our first day, I had just finished cleaning the first bedroom and its adjoining bath. Heading into the second bedroom, I realized I'd left my duster in the first room. When I went back to retrieve it, I stopped in surprise. Laid out on the bed was an old-fashioned outfit, a skirt and high-collared blouse. I was certain it hadn't been there before. Just as I was puzzling over this, I heard Lori calling my name in a panicked voice. I nearly tripped running downstairs, only to find her pointing at an old radio in the kitchen. "It just turned itself on," she exclaimed. She was visibly shaken, so I tried to calm her down. "Maybe it's modernized, motion-activated or something," I suggested as I inspected it. The radio was an ancient piece from the 1930s, and oddly enough, it wasn't even plugged in. I didn't mention this to her. "Nice music, though," I said lightly, reaching for her hand. "Care to waltz, my dear?" She laughed, but I didn't mention that I'd felt that familiar cobwebby sensation, like an electric charge on my skin, indicating a presence. I turned off the music, and we stepped outside for a smoke break. When we returned, Lori seemed more at ease, and I kept quiet about the odd events upstairs. Later, when I went back up to finish the room, the old-fashioned outfit was gone. I should note that the radio continued to play for us daily, even though the owners later confirmed that all their antiques were authentic, without any modernized features. Ongoing activity upstairs. In the following weeks, I began noticing small things in the upstairs rooms. I'd occasionally catch a figure in an old-fashioned maid's outfit walking down the hallway or hear a man's voice say, "Excuse me," in the servant's stairwell. My cleaning supplies would sometimes move as if someone had picked them up to inspect the labels before setting them down elsewhere. I'd also hear faint sounds of children playing and the creaking of a rocking chair coming from what felt like a former nursery, now a guest room. I could sense a lingering feeling that it had once been a child's room. The library/study. This room both fascinated and unsettled me. The owners, a lawyer and a history professor who also worked as an archaeologist, had filled it with a personal collection of artifacts, including a glass-encased mummified infant. Entering the room, I would often feel bombarded by emotions, likely because I'm both an empath and have a bit of psychometry, reading impressions from objects. The mummified baby brought a distinct sadness, even from behind the glass. While dusting the various pottery, arrowheads, and broken hieroglyphic tablets, I'd sometimes catch faint smells, like a woman's perfume, pipe tobacco, or the unpleasant odor of decay. Occasionally, I'd hear faint voices, and once, while holding a small red vial, I clearly heard the word poison. There was always an uncomfortable sense of being closely observed in that room, almost as if I were being judged. Each time, I left the room feeling drained. Lori's experiences. Lori wasn't as comfortable with the paranormal as I was, so I tried to offer mundane explanations whenever she experienced something odd. She often felt phantom touches, which I'd brush off as muscle twinges, found her supplies in unexpected places, to which I'd jokingly attribute forgetfulness, or felt watched. I'd suggest it was a nanny cam or other security device, though I'd checked and knew there weren't any. Despite my reassurances, the frequent occurrences did seem to unnerve her. The incident with the dining room chairs. After 6 months of cleaning the house weekly, an event occurred that I couldn't explain away. Lori asked for my help in flipping the dining room chairs onto the table so she could mop the floor after the owner's dinner party. I placed my supplies in the foyer and was about to help when we returned to find that every chair was already turned upside down on the table. We froze, staring in shock, and Lori dropped her bucket, which spilled water across the floor. That was not my imagination. Lori's voice cracked. And it wasn't me being forgetful. How do you explain that? Couldn't. Not in any rational way. I pointed out that neither of us had ever been harmed and suggested maybe the spirits were trying to be helpful. But Lori was done. Despite my attempts to reassure her, she refused to go back inside. I finished the cleaning alone that day and continued working there for another 6 months, though nothing as dramatic happened again. I got the impression that the spirit or spirits might have felt bad for frightening Lori, as the house seemed quieter in the following weeks. The owners didn't seem surprised when I told them it would be just me for a while. Back around 2005, when I was a teenager, I had an experience that still unsettles me today. I'm a female engineer by trade now, very logical and known for finding solutions to issues that don't have an obvious cause. But even now, looking back, I can't come up with any logical explanation for what happened that night. To give you some context, I lived out in the wooded country, on a short dead-end street at least 10 miles from the nearest town. There were only about 10 houses spread out across 2.5-acre wooded lots or larger, making the area very quiet. We didn't have large wild animals in our region, so bears or other big creatures never wandered in, nor did we see lost hikers or random strangers. In the 20 years I lived there, it was peaceful, secluded, and safe. This setting is crucial to understanding the oddness of what happened. When I was 6, new neighbors moved into the house next door. They had 2 boys around my age, which thrilled me. We became fast friends, though as kids we often went from best friends to rivals and back again. I'll call the oldest boy, who was 3 years older than me, T. By the time I was in my early teens, T and I had a habit of chatting at night through my open window on summer nights. My second-story window faced his house, looking over a few trees and a short walking path that connected our backyards. Sometimes, when he'd get home late, he'd toss a few pebbles at my window, and we'd talk for an hour or so, whispering quietly so as not to wake my parents. One summer night when I was around 14, I was in bed, and I heard a car pull up in T's driveway. I heard him chatting with his friends as he got out of the car, which drove off soon after. I whispered for him to stop by, but he must not have heard me, as he didn't respond. In a burst of brilliant teenage impulse, I decided I'd sneak outside and try to scare him as he walked home. I slipped downstairs, easing the back door open and quietly closing it behind me. Outside, we had a gravel area surrounding the back of our house with large oak rounds set out as stepping stones to minimize noise from crunching gravel. I knew exactly where to step and moved as silently as possible, facing T's house through a short path in the woods. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I didn't see him right away. Moments later, I heard the door at his house shut, and the porch light went off. It seemed he'd gone inside for the night. Still, I stayed where I was, crouched down and watching, because I thought I saw a dark shape moving in the woods between our houses, just not on the well-worn path. The area was full of wild rose and raspberry bushes, thick with thorns and hardly passable without a lot of noise and pain. I thought it strange that he'd choose to go off-path. But maybe he had his own plan to scare me? The shape in the shadows looked human-sized, moving slowly and stopping every so often, as if it was checking the area, listening and watching. I grew frustrated, crouching there in silence, as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Finally, I whispered for tea again but got no answer. At that point, I lost patience and carefully tiptoed back to the house, locking up quietly behind me. Back in my room, I leaned out my open window, still hoping to catch a glimpse of tea. Then I heard someone or something moving outside, closer than before. I whispered for tea one last time, but just as I did, I heard a sudden thud followed by a grunt, like someone had fallen into the window well below my room. If you've never seen one, a window well is a semicircular hole dug around a basement window, reinforced with metal and around 3 to 4 feet deep. There's no way T or anyone who knew the layout would have fallen into it. We'd all grown up playing hide and seek around each other's homes and knew the terrain by heart. The sound was distinctly human. A low grunt or moan, not at all like an animal, and the figure quietly pulled itself out without any thrashing. At that moment, my heart nearly stopped. I knew instinctively that this wasn't a game, and whatever was out there wasn't T. I leaned closer to the screen, straining to see as much of the ground below as possible. The shape shifted in the darkness, moving from the window well and stepping into the gravel with a crunch. This only made things stranger. T knew the stepping stones and would never walk across the noisy gravel, especially not if he was trying to keep quiet. I held my breath, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. The figure paused, then stood silently for what felt like forever. I stayed there at the window, frozen and pressing my face to the screen, as if not breathing would somehow make me invisible. Eventually, I grew tired, though it seemed I'd barely been at the window for more than 30 minutes. The figure never moved from its last position, or at least, I never heard it leave. In a mix of exhaustion and confusion, I finally lay down on my bed and fell asleep. Here's what I know for certain about that night. It wasn't T. I asked him later and he said he'd gone straight to bed. He had no reason to lie that it wasn't T's friend who dropped him off either. He had a curfew and was rushing home to avoid getting in trouble. There was no reason for any of our few neighbors to be lurking around our yard in the dead of night. The houses were spaced out on lots at least 2.5 acres, and the neighbors with kids were younger or older than us. Our region didn't have large animals, and though the area was wooded, wildlife usually stayed far from houses. The more I reflect on it, the more I'm convinced I was lucky. Whatever was out there that night didn't feel friendly, and if I'd stayed outside even a few moments longer, this could have turned into a very different story altogether. I have no logical explanation for it, and that bothers me even to this day. Around 30 years ago, during my late teens, I became fascinated with Ouija boards. Like many young people, I was drawn to the unknown and initially experimented with the board alongside friends. Eventually, I started using it alone, intrigued by the idea of contacting something beyond the physical realm. At 18, my brother and I moved into our first place away from home, a spacious 2-story condo in Westmont, Illinois. It became a lively bachelor pad, with people constantly coming and going. At one of our gatherings, I met the girl who would eventually become my wife. We quickly bonded, sharing a mutual interest in the paranormal, and we tried using the Ouija board together a few times. Although the messages we received were vague, something about it sparked my curiosity enough to keep experimenting solo. My brother, however, was adamant about not having the Ouija board in the house. Oddly enough, he was a complete skeptic when it came to anything paranormal, but his resistance was intense. "Get rid of it," he would insist, with no further explanation. His reaction surprised me, but being young and not particularly superstitious, I brushed it off. One night, after my girlfriend left, I decided to use the board before going to bed. I can't recall many specific details from my sessions, which usually ended without me closing the board properly. But I do remember a certain allure to the sessions. I felt both enthralled and spellbound as the planchette moved under my fingertips. It was a thrilling sensation, knowing there was no one else moving it but me, yet feeling the presence of something unseen. Vaguely, I remember encountering both a male and female spirit, or at least entities that identified themselves as such. That night, after a brief session, I fell asleep. Around 3 a.m., my alarm went off. In the dark, I immediately felt the presence of another body next to me. Its torso and legs pressed close against me, as if someone were lying in bed with me. Assuming it was my girlfriend who had stayed later than I thought, I reached over her to turn off the alarm and switch on the bedside lamp. The presence was so tangible that I actually had to lift myself up a bit to reach around her. But when I turned on the light, there was no one there. Only then did I remember that she had left hours earlier. I sat there stunned. The thought of having unknowingly shared my bed with an entity, possibly drawn by my Ouija board sessions, sent chills down my spine. However, I didn't feel threatened by it. Rather, it seemed as though it just wanted to be close, maybe even rest beside me. Still, the experience was enough to make me rethink using the Ouija board. I never touched it again after that night. Reflecting on it now, I realized that the Ouija board may act as a sort of doorway, a focal point rather than a true portal, allowing spirits or entities to enter briefly. I think my lack of awareness about closing the board probably left it open in a way, inviting whatever energies I was channeling. While my visitor that night seemed benign, I can see how easily it could have been something more menacing. Years later, after moving through several homes, my wife and I had a friend over for a casual night in. At some point in the evening, we got to talking about the Ouija board and my old experience. Our friend suggested, half-jokingly, that we should burn it. Fueled by late-night curiosity, we trudged outside in the snow and set it ablaze. Watching the board burn felt like a symbolic end to my experimentation with the paranormal. While I was lucky that my visitor was harmless, my experience serves as a cautionary tale. Even if you don't feel threatened initially, using a Ouija board without taking certain precautions can open you up to things you can't control, and some visitors may not come with peaceful intentions. It all began when I was about 11. One night, I woke up abruptly at around 2 a.m. I was usually a deep sleeper, so it was strange that I'd suddenly become alert. Then I heard a noise, a distinct tapping sound, coming from right above my head. I was sleeping on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed, and my sister wasn't in the room that night. As I sat there, the tapping grew louder, moving slowly down the side of the bed. It crept closer, following the bed's railing, until it reached the edge. Then, as if it had fallen off the bunk bed, I felt a gust of air rush past me. I froze, feeling a surge of fear. My first thought was that it might be a cockroach or a rat, but I would have seen it if it had fallen, and no creature that small could make such a noticeable gust of air. The sound continued, moving towards a pile of books I had by my bed. I watched, wide-eyed, as the books started toppling over, one after another, until they lay scattered across my bedroom floor. By then, I was fully awake, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I decided to leave the room, but just as I stood up, everything went black. Suddenly, I found myself in a completely dark space, holding a box. I don't know how, but it felt as though I was meant to open it. When I did, an awful scream echoed out, piercing and continuous, filling the space around me. It wasn't a single scream, but many, layered together, growing louder and louder until I fell to the ground, pressing my hands over my ears. The darkness suddenly turned to a blinding white, and I was back in my room, still sitting up in bed, just as I'd been before the visions. I stood up, my body trembling as I moved toward the door. Oddly, it felt like the door was getting farther and farther away. Disturbing images started flashing through my mind. Images of violence, strange creatures, and other things I didn't understand. When I finally reached the door, I opened it only to hear the bathroom door slam shut behind me. That was enough. I bolted out of my room, flew down the stairs, and camped out on the living room couch for the rest of the night. When I woke up, it was only around 2:15 a.m. I was still shaken but managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I told my mom about the tapping and the books being scattered. She said she'd ask my grandpa to check the room for cockroaches or rats. Later, I went back to my room and found the books still lying on the floor, just as I'd left them. When my grandpa arrived, he inspected every corner of my room. Under the bed, in the closet, even the roof, and found nothing. No droppings, no holes, no signs that any animal had been in the house. When I told my family the full story, most of them laughed it off, saying it was just a dream or that I was imagining things. I didn't mention the visions or the feeling of being trapped in that dark, screaming space. Since then, I've moved houses twice, but strange things still happen. If I'm alone in my room, especially if my sister sleeps elsewhere, I sometimes hear tapping or footsteps on the roof. No one ever seems to be there when I check. By the time I was 13, I started to feel a presence when I was alone, like someone watching me. It's unsettling. At times, I'll feel lightheaded, and dark images flash through my mind. But other times, I feel the opposite, an overwhelming sense of comfort and warmth, as if someone's there watching over me. I feel a warmth on my hands, like someone holding them, or a gentle pressure around me, like an embrace. I don't know what's causing all of this or why it's happening to me. Part of me feels that something dark is following me, but there's also a sense of calm in those rare moments of warmth. I'm confused and wonder if I'll ever find answers to these experiences. Ever since I was young, there's been a spirit in my house who seems to take pleasure in making his presence known, often in ways that scare me. I can't shake the feeling that he's up to no good. The first and only time I actually saw him was a moment I'll never forget. At the time, my family had 2 guinea pigs and a rabbit who lived in the basement. My job was to clean the guinea pig's cage every weekend. The basement layout had the rabbit in a large, multi-shelf cage, while a plastic pen area allowed the guinea pigs and the rabbit time to roam, though never together, since we worried the rabbit's powerful legs might accidentally hurt the guinea pigs. My cats would often follow me down during cage cleaning, knowing the guinea pigs would be out and about. One day, while I was cleaning with my back turned to the rest of the basement, I saw my cat suddenly dash away out of the corner of my eye. At the same time, the guinea pigs started squeaking and darting around wildly, and the rabbit jumped from shelf to shelf in his cage. Startled, I turned around to see a hand rushing toward me. It was a solid, white hand, transparent enough that I could still see the wall through it. The hand was coming fast, fully extended as if reaching out to grab me, but it stopped at the wrist, disconnected from any body. I leapt over the pen in a panic and sprinted upstairs, taking a wide arc around the hand as I ran, too terrified to look back. Despite only seeing his hand, I had a distinct impression of a man, though I don't know why. Upstairs, there's a study where we always leave the light on at night. My siblings and I swear we can hear typing in there, despite the computers being off. If you stand in the doorway, you can sometimes see the keys moving as though someone's typing away. If I've dared to enter at night, the typing stops, and the room fills with an uncomfortable, cold presence. I feel it's the same man from the basement, always observing, never revealing his intentions. I once left the computers on and opened to a blank document, hoping he'd type out a message. But every time, the computers somehow turn off before morning. Whatever he wants, he's not interested in sharing it. Occasionally, I wake up to feel an icy hand on my face or a light tug on my blanket, as if he's reminding me, I'm here. But there's nothing friendly about it. I get a strong sense of a smirk, a thin, twisted mouth that seems to mock me. Sometimes he'll tug gently on my hair, too, just enough to unsettle me, never enough to hurt. I've tried to ignore him, hoping he'd lose interest. In the basement, I often hear loud banging sounds through the vents at night, especially through the one that connects to my mom's bedroom. Growing up, I'd sometimes sleep on her side of the bed, near the vent. My mom would reassure me, saying it was just our rabbit moving around. But even when I've slept in the basement myself, I've never heard the rabbit making nearly as much noise as the loud, repetitive banging I hear through the vents at night. Part of me suspects that my smirking handman is behind it. Sometimes at night, with my bedroom door open, I hear him typing away in the study, or hear soft footsteps going up and down the stairs. If I go to check, the sounds stop. I've never tried standing on the stairs, though. There's something about the sense of his presence on the staircase that feels off, like it wouldn't be safe to venture further. Years ago, both my sister and I would hear knocking sounds during the night. Back then, I didn't have a clear impression of any specific person behind it, but now I wonder if it was him all along. Maybe he was trying to get my attention from the beginning, hiding in the sounds and spaces of the house, slowly making his presence known. Christmas can feel like an emotional maze for many of us, and this year has been a bit rougher for me. Since my son's passing in 2002, the holidays have been bittersweet. His absence is always felt, and even more so when everything seems so focused on family. This year, my daughter gently told me she'd only be able to spend part of Christmas Eve with me. She'd also be spending time with her boyfriend's family, then with her dad on Christmas Day. I told her it was fine and I wanted to be okay with it, but honestly, part of me felt disappointed. Christmas Eve has always been my time. In the days leading up to Christmas, little things began happening around the house, and I started wondering if my son was paying me a visit. It started with small, inexplicable events, just enough to make me think some prankster was hanging around. Our family has always had a weird sense of humor, so it could have been any of them. Monday, December 21st, 4 a.m. I woke up early and told myself, today's the day. I need to put up the Christmas tree. As I swung my legs out of bed, I felt my foot kick something across the floor. I turned on the overhead light and was surprised to see it was a small ornament my son had made for me. I hadn't even pulled out the decorations yet. For a moment, I wondered if my cat had somehow unearthed it, but it didn't make sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that Josh was there. Somehow. I also noticed a sudden chill in the room, but it was winter after all. Around 4:20 a.m., I headed to the kitchen to make coffee, only to realize the coffee grounds were missing. I checked the usual places: shelf, counter, fridge, but nothing. I figured maybe my roommate used them up and forgot to tell me, so I went for instant coffee instead. As I was reaching for the kettle, I opened the microwave, and there was the coffee just sitting there. My roommate later swore he didn't put it there. 9 a.m. Next was my battle with the Christmas tree, tucked away in the closet. To get to it, I practically had to empty the entire closet and drag out each massive section one at a time. Just as I finally got a grip on the base section and began pulling it out, the string holding it together suddenly popped, and the branches spread open, pinning me against the closet wall. It honestly felt like someone was playfully resisting my efforts, like that feeling of playing tug-of-war with a mischievous dog. "All right, tree," I said out loud. "This only ends one way and I'm winning." After what felt like a wrestling match, I finally got the tree out of the closet and assembled in the living room. But as I looked over the string, I couldn't find any tear or break. It was as if someone had simply untied it. Later, my roommate asked if I'd noticed the lights flickering. I had, but I chalked it up to needing an electrician. Still, the timing was strange. Tuesday, December 22nd, 4 a.m. I woke up early again, and as I passed through the living room, one of my musical snow globes suddenly started playing. I thought maybe my footsteps had caused a vibration that set it off, but it played the whole song. Just as it finished, a second globe began to play, and as it ended, the third globe started up as well. These aren't the kinds of globes that have automatic settings. They're wind up only with no on-off switches. I stood there, stunned. Throughout the morning, I noticed my cat, Kirby, acting unusually playful. He'd stand on his hind legs, roll around as if wrestling with someone, then dart around the room, tail flicking. I couldn't help but laugh, watching him play with whatever invisible friend was in the room with us. Around 3:30 p.m., while I was sitting on the floor wrapping presents, I happened to glance into the glass of the curio cabinet and saw a brief, shadowy outline of a young man. It was just a second, but I instinctively whispered my son's name. Just after that, my tape went missing. I looked around everywhere within arm's reach, no tape. So, with a smile, I decided to speak to the air. "All right, Josh, very funny. Could you give the tape back, please?" A second later, I felt a soft thud on my back. I turned around and, sure enough, there was the tape. Laughing, I said, Well, thanks, but you could have thrown it at me face on. After that, I just kept talking to him as I wrapped the gifts, telling him how much I missed him, how grateful I was for the time we had as a family, and sharing some of my favorite memories. I told him about Christmas Eve and how I still hold on to our traditions, even if it's different now. I even mentioned that if he could, maybe he could help with the flickering lights. They were starting to unnerve my roommate. Since then, the lights have stopped flickering. This holiday season felt a little less lonely, knowing that Josh was there, even if only in these little moments. It's a reminder that the ones we love never truly leave us. They find small ways to stay close. I was no older than 5 or 6 when I had my tonsils taken out at Wood River Hospital. To say I was petrified is an understatement. The whole process, from the talk of going under the knife to the overwhelming smell of ether, filled me with dread. I still can't stand the smell of ether without feeling nauseous. And there were the masked doctors and nurses, bending over me as they held the black rubber mask over my nose and mouth, telling me to count backward from 100. Somewhere around 98, 62, baseball, I drifted into unconsciousness. When I woke, I was in a strange bed, surrounded by curtains and wrapped in silence. Well, except for the howling wind outside the window. The pain in my throat was almost unbearable, raw and raspy, and as I tried to make sense of where I was, a woman's presence became clear to me. She was standing quietly by my bed, comforting and kind, like she had been there for a while, watching over me. She wasn't a nurse or someone I recognized, yet she made me feel safe in a way I really needed just then. She gently wiped my brow and dabbed my mouth with napkins as I coughed and spat up traces of blood. She spoke softly, her voice soothing even though I could barely manage to respond. I was surprised when she asked if I knew her 2 boys. She even said their names. And yes, I did know them. We had played together a few times. One of them I got along with, the other... Well, I sometimes teased him about his thick glasses that made his eyes look huge, like he was seeing the world through Coke bottle lenses. She didn't seem to mind that we weren't the best of friends. She just smiled and kept comforting me. Between the effects of the ether and the relentless pain, I drifted in and out of sleep, but every time I woke, she was there, ready to help. Eventually, I must have fallen into a deeper sleep because when I woke up again, the woman was gone. It was just me, the occasional nurse, and that same haunting wind outside the window. When my mom arrived later, her sudden appearance made me jump, pushing back the curtain to check on me. She wanted to know if everything had gone as expected, if I was all right. I managed a raspy whisper, telling her they hadn't mentioned how much my throat would hurt. Then I asked, "Where'd the nice lady go?" She gave me a puzzled look, clearly not knowing what I was talking about. I didn't press it and, feeling exhausted, focused on a small bowl of ice cream the nurse brought, which didn't soothe my throat nearly as much as I'd hoped. Soon after, I was discharged, bundled up and on my way home with my mom. Days passed, and then I learned something strange that left me speechless. The mother of those 2 boys, yes, the same woman I'd thought was there by my bedside, had passed away in a tragic explosion at the ammunition plant where she worked, right around the time I was in the hospital. I tried to bring it up to her boys once, but I don't think they really understood. Maybe I didn't either. I was just a kid, but I somehow came to believe that their mother, somehow, had been the one at my bedside that night. Even considering the terrible accident that had taken her life, it felt like she had come back to offer comfort to a scared little boy in need. I don't know why she'd choose to help me, a friend of her son's, but I've always felt grateful. She was a truly kind woman, both in life and, I believe, in spirit. Coming face to face with a ghostly apparition is one of those unforgettable, hair-raising stories we tell around campfires on chilly nights. But encountering something even stranger, a species from another world? That's another level entirely. I was only 14 when I experienced one of the most surreal moments of my life, a moment that might have reshaped my entire worldview, if only I had remembered it. Strangely, the memory of this encounter lay dormant until years later, after my stepfather passed away. He took his own life, a single gunshot to the head. I've often wondered if he, too, had a memory buried deep within, one that finally rose to the surface. It was the early 1960s, one October morning, when my stepdad and I ventured deep into the quiet woods at the edge of our town in southern Illinois. We were exploring the overgrown trees, dense grasses, and the occasional remnants of rusted fencing from the old Olin munitions factory. These woods were largely forgotten, empty, quiet, lifeless, aside from the rare sound of a croaking frog or a katydid's lonely call. I found comfort in its isolation. On that particular day, I was following the creek with my trusty .22 rifle in hand, mostly for target practice and a sense of security. As we walked, I spotted something unusual farther up the creek, a metallic shape, partially hidden in the underbrush. I moved closer, thinking it looked like a child's wagon, but its unusual design soon made me pause. It had two cylindrical tubes on each side with a flat area on top, almost like a deck. In my young mind, I imagined it would make an ideal raft, light enough to float and wide enough to stand on. But there were no wheels or any way it could have been pushed here, and it seemed out of place, like something dropped out of the sky. I knew my stepfather would be intrigued, so I planned to bring him back to see it the next day. The next morning, I eagerly led him back into the woods, rifle in hand. After some searching, we found the object again, though it seemed even stranger on a second look. It wasn't quite as flawless as I'd remembered. There was a large crack along the top. As I processed this disappointment, my stepfather and I agreed it would be too damaged to salvage. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Then it happened. An invisible force seemed to paralyze me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Frozen, as if time itself had stopped. My stepfather stood similarly trapped, and together we watched as two towering figures approached us from the shadows. These beings were humanoid but reptilian in appearance, standing at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Each wore what looked like brown, form-fitting suits, complete with gloves, boots, and skullcaps, as though their uniforms were meticulously tailored to cover every inch of them. I was terrified, unable to move or scream, as the closer of the two creatures spoke to me, his voice echoing within my head rather than through the air. He was angry, accusatory, questioning me sharply about my intentions with the rifle. I could feel his aggression pressing down on me, and I was sure he meant me harm. My mind screamed in panic, yet my body remained locked in place. Thankfully, the second creature intervened, placing a calming hand on the other's shoulder, saying, "Stop. This is just a child. He poses no threat." With his more soothing voice, the second figure began explaining their presence. As our initial fear subsided, he revealed that the object I had stumbled upon was, indeed, a spaceship, their vessel. They were explorers on a mission, though the purpose of that mission remained a mystery. Still frozen, I felt a peculiar sense of relief wash over me as he assured us they meant no harm and would release us soon, and that, when they did, we would have no memory of this encounter. As time seemed to slow, I found I was able to communicate with this calmer being, almost as if we were sharing thoughts rather than words. Meanwhile, the angry one kept his stance directly in front of my stepfather, watching him intently. In my mind, I asked how such enormous creatures could possibly fit inside that tiny craft. The creature's response surprised me, a soft chuckle echoing within my mind. He explained they had the technology to shrink their vessel to avoid detection, which was why it appeared almost toy-like in size. The crack I'd seen was just an illusion, a mental trick to keep me from getting too close. They had sensed my presence the day before but chose not to confront me then. It was only out of curiosity that they came forward now, curious about our presence in their isolated hiding place. The conversation, if that's what you could call it, faded from my memory almost as soon as it began. I have only the faintest recollection of walking home with my stepfather, neither of us saying a word. We were both in a daze, moving forward without thought or purpose, desperate to leave that place behind. And so, life resumed, as though the incident never happened. But now, with my stepfather gone, I sometimes wonder if he, too, remembered that encounter in his final days. It all started innocently enough in 1988, during my son's birthday celebration. Among the colorful wrapping paper and cheerful chaos of presents, a mysterious gift appeared, a Ouija board. No card, no explanation, and no one ever admitted to bringing it. The board felt out of place at a 7-year-old's birthday party, especially to me. I didn't see it as a toy, but rather a tool, and one that shouldn't be in the hands of children. I quickly placed it on a high shelf in the closet, planning to dispose of it quietly when the time was right. However, as things tend to go in a busy household, the board got pushed to the back of the closet, forgotten beneath piles of other forgotten things. Flash forward to 1995 or 96. My father came to visit, and since he was staying in my room, I'd cleared out a few drawers for him to use. When he left, I found a deck of tarot cards in the drawer he'd used. Odd, I thought, because they weren't mine. My father had always used playing cards for readings. He believed tarot cards worked best when gifted, not purchased. When I called to let him know he'd left the cards, he sounded confused and insisted he hadn't brought any tarot cards with him. Nevertheless, I mailed them to him, assuming he'd just forgotten. But only a week later, I opened that drawer and there they were again, the same deck of tarot cards, staring back at me. I assumed I'd only thought I'd sent them, but a call to my father confirmed he had received a deck, identical to the one I was now holding. Somehow, there were now 2 decks in 2 different places, and we were both left scratching our heads. Soon after, I mentioned the mystery to my brother, who offered to take the cards off my hands. I sent the deck to him, hoping that would be the end of it. But again, within weeks, the cards returned to my drawer. By now, there were 3 identical decks in 3 separate locations. My brother sighed and said, "Val, maybe the cards are meant to stay with you." Years passed, and I moved to a smaller apartment in 2003. As I sorted through things for the move, I stumbled upon the Ouija board again, still in its shrink wrap. My son had passed away the previous year, and I was struggling with overwhelming grief. Though I should have thrown it out, something in me, perhaps a desperate desire to connect, to reach out to anything beyond this world, made me put it in the keep pile. So there it sat on a new shelf in a new closet, untouched yet somehow watching, as if waiting. From time to time, I'd catch myself standing in that closet, staring at the box. A strange, persistent urge within me wanted to use the board, even though I knew better. Every time I caught myself reaching for it, I'd feel an intense internal struggle, like 2 opposing forces warring within me. I'd leave the closet drained, as if I'd been fighting off something unseen. Then one day, I opened the closet and saw the board had freed itself from its shrink wrap. The planchette sat there, ready as if to mock me. The box was gone entirely. My daughter had been staying with her father in another town, so I knew it wasn't her. And I certainly hadn't touched it. Terrified, I shut the closet door and backed away, shaken by the powerful feeling that something was trying to lure me into using it, daring me to break that final barrier. In a panic, I called an old friend, Father Joe, asking if he could come bless the apartment. Even though the space had already been blessed before I moved in, this new tension made me think another blessing couldn't hurt. I also thought I'd ask him to take the board with him when he left. As soon as I hung up, I heard a loud thud from the closet. When I opened the door, I found the deck of tarot cards lying on the floor, as if it had been flung with force. There was no explanation for how it had left the drawer and landed in front of the closet door. Father Joe arrived soon after, and I scrambled to toss the cards back into the closet. Explaining the unwanted gift story, I asked if he could take the Ouija board off my hands. But when I opened the closet door, the board was nowhere to be found. I searched the entire closet, but it had simply vanished, as if swallowed by the darkness. Father Joe, seeing my distress, reassured me. "If it's gone, I suppose there's nothing I can take away," he said calmly. Instead, he blessed every corner of the apartment, including the closet. For 12 years, I've never seen that board again. But the tarot cards? Just a week later, they reappeared in the drawer, right where they had always been, as if they had never left. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My room is on the 2nd floor, and I always sleep with the door closed and locked. My parents' room is nearby, right by the stairs, and my brother's room is across the hall from me. My room is right above the kitchen, so I can hear almost everything that happens down there. We also have 2 cats. At night, one of them usually stays in my parents' room or by the top of the stairs, while the other one roams around, plays, or sleeps elsewhere. Our cats are very timid around anyone outside our immediate family, so if we ever have visitors, they vanish for hours. About 2 years ago, just a few days after Christmas, I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a loud bang. I thought I might have dreamed it, or maybe one of our cats had knocked something over. But then, a few minutes later, I heard a man's voice speaking softly. I couldn't make out the words, but the deep tone chilled me. For a moment, I wondered if someone had broken into the house. Then, a few minutes later, I heard the sound of a chair moving in the kitchen. My heart started racing. First a bang, then a voice, and now a chair moving? I was convinced someone was downstairs. Terrified, I sat up, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about creeping to the top of the stairs to see if I could catch a glimpse of anything. I didn't want to wake up my family for nothing. Just as I was about to get up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The upstairs hallway is partially carpeted, which muffles footsteps. But the part leading toward my sister's room is all wood, so any steps on it echo clearly. It definitely sounded like someone was walking on the wood section near my door. My heart was pounding, but I kept trying to reason with myself. Maybe it was my sister up for some reason, although that still didn't explain the man's voice. After about 20 minutes of silence, I decided to check the hallway. I thought if I opened the door and didn't see one of the cats at the top of the stairs, I'd go wake my parents. If the cats were hiding, that meant someone was in the house. I quietly unlocked my door, but as soon as I did, a wave of terror washed over me. I was shaking so badly I couldn't bring myself to actually open it. I felt like something was on the other side, holding the doorknob, but I kept telling myself it was just my nerves. Just as I gathered the courage to open the door, it started to open on its own, very slowly. Panicked, I slammed it shut. I could swear I felt resistance, like someone on the other side was trying to push it open. My phone was charging within reach, so I grabbed it and called my mom's cell phone. As soon as I heard her phone ring from her room, the pressure on my door disappeared. My mom picked up, and I frantically told her that I thought someone was in the house. My parents immediately searched the entire house, but they found nothing. No one was there. When I explained everything to my parents, they tried to make sense of it. Maybe I dreamed the bang, or maybe one of our cats had knocked something over. They suggested the voice could have been my dad or brother talking in their sleep, and maybe the chair moving was just the cat again. My mom thought the door could have opened because of the air turning on, but none of their explanations felt right. We didn't find anything knocked over, so it likely wasn't the cats. The voice didn't sound like my dad or brother, and when my door is closed, I can only hear sounds from the hallway or directly below in the kitchen. I shouldn't have been able to hear voices from my parents' room. And then there was the odd fact that neither of our cats were on the stairs or in my parents' room while they searched the house, which is rare. They don't hide without reason. My only explanation is a ghost. In another experience, I've mentioned that I have a protective spirit, a lady who once appeared and warned me not to open the door. Strangely, she didn't show up this time. Maybe it meant I was safe, or maybe it wasn't a ghost at all. Still, I have my suspicions. The oddest part is that the last time she told me not to open the door was also right after Christmas, years ago. Even as I'm typing this, I don't feel entirely alone. I keep feeling like someone's beside me, even though there's no one here. My blinds keep banging against the window, and one of them won't stop vibrating. The air is off and it's not windy outside. Whatever it is, it feels like it's still here watching. At the time of writing this, I'm 16 and have lived in the same house my entire life. This house, located in the Chicago suburbs, was also my dad's childhood home. It's at least 70 years old, and I know for a fact that my grandfather passed away in our driveway after having a heart attack. Beyond that, I'm unaware of any other deaths here. Though I've always found supernatural stories intriguing, I've never been fully convinced they're real. I lean more toward being an atheist, so I don't usually attribute unusual events to ghosts. But lately, things have been happening that I can't explain. We're currently adding an extension to the house, and I've moved into my parents' old bedroom while they prepare their new room across the hall. I've always felt slightly uneasy in this room. It's darker, with deep oak floors and walls that make it feel closed in. When I was a baby, my parents say I would sit outside this room and stare into it as if watching something. I didn't think much of that story until I moved in. When I first started sleeping here, all I had was a mattress on the floor. One morning, I woke up with a large cut near my eye, which has now healed into a pink, slightly depressed scar. The cut was deep, and I checked everywhere but found nothing sharp around me. The door was closed, so our 2 dogs couldn't have come in. My parents figured I might have scratched myself in my sleep, but I doubt it. My nails are short, and a cut that deep would probably have woken me up. Then, a few weeks later, I had a lucid dream, which isn't unusual for me. But this one was different. I felt like I was being held down, and when I woke up in a panic, I heard a little girl singing. A few soft notes before it abruptly stopped. I remember feeling absolutely terrified and opened my door immediately, just to be sure I was alone. For over a month after that, everything was quiet. I settled into my new room, getting used to it. Then, last Saturday, something strange happened. I was doing homework when a strange feeling washed over me. I felt like I had to stop everything and just lay down, staring at the ceiling for about 20 minutes. While I was lying there, my dog started scratching at the door, growling in a way she never does. My dad let her in, and she walked around the room, staring at something invisible, then left. This behavior is odd because my dog doesn't like me very much. I trained her when she was young using a collar she didn't enjoy, and ever since, she associates me with that experience. She usually ignores me and never enters my room. But recently, she's been coming in frequently, roaming around like she's checking on something. Apparently, she does this even when I'm not home. A few days ago, I woke up to find that my phone had been moved to a different spot across the room. In its place was my old phone, which had been factory reset and was supposed to be sold on eBay. I know I had my new phone next to me, as I always double-check that it's there with the alarm set. To make it weirder, all my pictures were deleted from the new phone. It requires a passcode, so it couldn't have happened accidentally, and even if it had been hacked, that wouldn't explain why it was physically moved. Later that day, I came home to find my TV turned on. The remote control was in my closet, tucked away in a drawer. No one in my family even knows where I keep it. The power button on the TV is also hidden on the side, in a spot you'd have to know to look for. When I asked around, everyone said they hadn't touched it. Maybe one of the construction workers turned it on. But that didn't make sense either. The colors on the screen were also inverted, which was unsettling. I could probably chalk that up to a malfunction, but it felt odd. Recently, I've been feeling more and more uncomfortable in this room, like someone is watching me. I struggle to fall asleep, and when I finally do, I either have no dreams at all or I'm haunted by nightmares. Despite being someone who usually remembers vivid dreams for weeks, I have a few theories about what's going on. Maybe I'm just stressed, or maybe something is haunting me. I even considered that a dresser I bought from a thrift store might be involved, but that doesn't seem likely since I've been experiencing these strange things for a while now. To this day, I'm not sure how I feel about ghosts. I know what I've seen and felt over the years, but I still hesitate to believe in them, maybe because it feels safer if I don't. This story takes place back in late elementary school, and it has a few parts, so bear with me. It all happened at a sleepover at my friend Stephanie's house. We'd all met up at a park before going inside, and this was my first time in her house. Her place seemed exciting to us as kids. There was the main floor, but it had about 4 or 5 steps leading down to a subfloor that was only 3 or 4 feet lower. This subfloor was separated by wooden railings, so you had to use the stairs to get down. The subfloor only had one door, which led to the basement, and this door was usually left open. We set up our sleeping bags on the subfloor, stayed up chatting, and eventually fell asleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a strange urge, a strong feeling that I needed to go down into the basement. I sat up and found myself staring at the closed basement door, mentally figuring out how I'd weave through the sleeping bags to reach it. Suddenly, I heard a noise and turned to see my friend Sydney staring at me, looking freaked out. I would have been too if I'd woken up to see someone just staring at a closed door. Her watching me put a stop to my plan, but the urge to go into the basement stayed with me. Somehow I fell back asleep. Later, I was woken by the sudden blast of a radio, but oddly, no one else seemed to notice. Some light was coming in through the windows, so it was probably around dawn. Looking up at the railings, I saw a little girl standing there, staring at me with big, dark brown eyes. She had slightly wavy dark brown hair and wore a white dress with a faint pink pattern on it. Since Stephanie was the oldest of 3, I assumed it was one of her little sisters. But for some reason, I felt like I shouldn't speak to her. She didn't move toward me. She just kept making eye contact, which felt unsettling. I looked down at my pillow, unsure whether I should ignore her or try to shoo her away. Just then, the radio stopped, and when I looked up again, the girl was gone. I assumed she had turned on the radio and then left, but I didn't see her again or hear any other sounds. I had to leave the sleepover early for a soccer game, so I didn't get a chance to talk to Stephanie about the girl. But on Monday at school, as I was walking out of the building with her and Sydney, I brought it up. I mentioned how I saw one of her little sisters and thought she was cute. Stephanie's reaction was odd. She asked when I'd seen her sisters. I told her I'd seen one of them while we were all sleeping. Her response gave me chills. She explained, "My sisters went straight to my grandparents' house after school last Friday. They weren't even home that night." I tried to brush it off by saying maybe I had dreamed it, then walked away. But Sydney caught up with me, looking serious. She started asking questions about the little girl I'd seen. Did she have thick, wavy brown hair, a white dress with pink stitching, and big brown eyes? Sydney was describing the girl I'd seen perfectly. She then told me something that truly freaked me out. Stephanie's sisters weren't the only ones who looked nothing like that girl. Sydney said she had seen the same little girl every time she'd been to Stephanie's house, but no one else in Stephanie's family ever seemed to notice her. If they were playing outside, Sydney would see the girl watching from a window. If they were in the kitchen, the girl would stand just outside, staring. She always stayed in another room, only watching, never joining them until that sleepover. Sydney said she woke up in the middle of the night and saw the girl standing over me, staring as I slept. Then, she watched the girl slip past everyone on the floor, walk to the basement, and quietly close the door behind her. Sydney said that right after the door shut, I sat up and started staring at it, as if something was pulling me to go in. Somehow, the girl had woken me the moment she left. I'll never know what this girl wanted with me. Was she trying to hurt me? Show me something? I didn't want to find out. After that night, I never went to Stephanie's house again. As far as I know, only Sydney and I ever saw her. A few weeks later, I did finally meet Stephanie's real sisters. They looked nothing like the girl I saw that night, so I know they weren't playing a trick on me. To this day, I can still picture that little girl's face and wonder why she chose to appear that night. It was after midnight on July 22nd, 2015, when I went to bed. Not long after, I heard a knock on my apartment door. Startled, I got up and called through the locked door. "Who is it?" Silence. Then, another knock. "Who is it?" I called louder this time, but there was no answer. I didn't want to just open the door, so I pulled over a step stool to peek through the peephole. The stairwell light was on, but no one was there. Strange. More fun and games? I muttered to the empty hallway, thinking it might be one of the spirits that occasionally visits me. There was a chill in the air, and that familiar tingling sensation. As I climbed down, I turned and froze. Standing right inside my apartment was one of my twin sisters. But that couldn't be possible. For one, my sisters live several states away. For another, the sister I was looking at, let's call her C, has been dead for over a decade. Her living twin, D, was in Kentucky. Although they were identical, I'd always been able to tell them apart. And I knew this was C. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, she urgently whispered, "Call! Call now. He's at the door." And then she was gone. Dee's face immediately came to mind. Dee lives in a rural part of Kentucky, where her daughter and son-in-law built her a private apartment at the back of their house. It was around 1 a.m. my time, making it 3 a.m. there, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone, dialed her number, and let it ring. Being almost 75, Dee has difficulty moving and is nearly blind, so it took her a while to answer. Finally, I heard her sleepy voice, and I quickly said, "Dee, it's me. See." But she cut me off with a panicked voice. "Val, I think there's someone outside. I just heard." I didn't wait for her to finish. I grabbed my cell and dialed my niece, who lives with her husband, Ed, in the main part of the house. "Keep talking to me, Dee," I said. "I'm calling Ed now." In their rural area, Ed was our best bet. He'd get to her long before the cops. And when I say rural, I mean 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. Ed answered, sounding annoyed. "Somebody better be dying. Who the hell is this?" "Ed, get your gun and get to Dee. Somebody's breaking in." "What?" His voice snapped to full alert. "Go. Go now." I could hear him telling my niece that there was a crazy woman on the phone. But as soon as she heard it was me, she urged him to hurry. I stayed on the line with Dee as she started to cry, saying that the door was being tried. I reassured her that Ed was on his way. My niece took charge and called the cops while I stayed on with Dee, who needed me more in that moment. Things became a bit chaotic then. All I had was audio on my end, but I could piece together that my niece had entered Dee's apartment from the inside door while Ed was approaching from outside. I heard a gunshot and a muffled yell as Ed reached the door. He called out, asking if Dee was okay, and my niece, trying to calm my sister, let us know that the cops were on their way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dee came back on the line. She was safe but sounded shaken, and she asked why I'd called in the first place. I almost laughed in relief, but I tried to explain C's visit as best as I could. Thankfully, Dee didn't question me. She simply said, "I'm glad you listened and called." A few YGS members asked about an experience I had with what I believe was an elemental or nature spirit, so here it is. This took place about 18 years ago, when I was around 30 or 31. At the time, my wife and I lived in a coach house in La Grange, Illinois. 100 years earlier, the house had been part of a large estate with winding, interconnected lagoons. In the early 1960s, the property was rezoned and divided into 4 lots. The main house stayed on one block while the coach house, now 2 residences, stood on the next. My wife and I lived on the second floor, with a new construction next door and another house separating us from the main house. We lived in that house for 12.5 years, drawn by the wild, overgrown nature of the property. Oaks, maples, and mulberry trees surrounded us, with a large garden and greenhouse from a neighboring estate on the other side. It felt like a hidden sanctuary, and visitors often commented that it was like stepping into a secret garden. Our upstairs apartment was small but cozy, with a back room that had French doors leading to a small wooden balcony. This balcony overlooked the wooded backyard and the other houses around it. I'd like to mention that I haven't shared this story with anyone besides my wife. It's a unique experience, even among the unexplained events I've had. Writing it down, I realized some might compare it to a hallucination, but I hadn't taken anything to induce it. It was very late on a midsummer night. Julie and I had hosted a few friends earlier in the evening, and after she went to bed, I decided to sit outside for a while. I'd had a couple of drinks, but nothing that could explain what I was about to experience. I settled onto the porch, enjoying the warm night and a gentle breeze. After about 15 minutes, my attention was drawn to a silver maple tree to the right of the balcony. Its closest branches were about 10 feet away, moving ever so slightly in the breeze. Suddenly, one leafy branch seemed to extend toward me, moving within 4 feet. I was transfixed. The branch took on a life of its own, and I sensed something unusual was happening. Before my eyes, a face seemed to emerge from the leaves, forming from shades of green, ochre, sepia, umber, and dark yellow. It's hard to describe, but the colors seemed to radiate from the branch itself, shaping into a round face with a broad, warm smile, smiling eyes, a small nose, and leaf-like hair framing the forehead and sides. A lower branch extended toward me, almost like an arm reaching out. I felt an urge to reach back and touch it. The face's smile widened as I extended my hand. A rush of adrenaline and an inexplicable sense of unity washed over me, as if I were connecting with something ancient and hidden. Odd as it may sound, It felt like the face had come with the wind, subtle and natural. The atmosphere was charged, not with electricity but with a profound feeling of interconnectedness. A sense of shared thoughts, emotions, and perhaps even souls. After a moment, the branch slowly retracted, and the face faded with it. I can't say it glowed, but there was something vivid about the colors, giving it clear definition. Once it vanished, everything seemed to return to normal. The night was quiet, the breeze light as before. I was left feeling rejuvenated, as though I'd touched a part of the world usually hidden from view. For days afterward, I thought about that encounter, wishing that everyone could experience something so rare and beautiful. Something akin to the soul of a tree. My wife and I have been running a pet care business for 15 years. One of our main services is taking care of pets in their owners' homes while they're away. On average, we spend about half of each month at various houses, sometimes together, sometimes separately if we have multiple clients. In all these years, I've only had a handful of vague, possibly paranormal experiences in clients' homes. But there was one incident that was distinctly different, and rather unsettling. This happened about 5 years ago, while we were watching a basset hound named Emmy. I'd stayed at this house over a dozen times across a 10-year span, starting back when the homeowners had a different basset named Tubby, a wonderful old fellow. The house was a 1940s ranch style with a large, finished basement. Although it had been updated over the years with a more contemporary feel, it still retained some of its original character. It was the second or third night of a week-long stay, a Saturday. Julie and I were in the den at one end of the house. I decided to take a nap in the bedroom down a long hallway on the opposite side of the house. It was daytime and the light on the nightstand beside the bed happened to be on. This was an older lamp with a switch under the lampshade that took a bit of effort to turn. It made a distinct, loud click when switched on or off. I had just started to drift off when I heard that loud click and realized that the lamp had turned off by itself. It struck me as unusual. The lamp switch required a firm twist, and it wasn't the sort of thing that would just turn off on its own. Recognizing it as likely paranormal, I got up and walked down the hall to tell Julie about it. She was reading a book and hadn't left the den, so she hadn't turned it off. Later, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe some spirit was simply telling me not to waste electricity. But the real event happened that night. Julie and I went to bed around 11:30. At around 3 in the morning, I woke up, as I often do in the middle of the night, to an odd realization. I could hear 2 distinct voices engaged in a deep conversation at the end of my side of the bed. The voices were unlike anything I'd ever heard, both before and since. They didn't sound human, and the language was completely unfamiliar. I sat up halfway, transfixed by the sounds. The voices were clear and intense, almost guttural, with a tone that brought to mind the sound of trolls arguing. Their timbre reminded me of the eerie voice from The Shining, when the child whispers, "Red rum." It felt like they were in a heated debate about something, and strangely, I had the impression that whatever they were discussing involved me. After a few moments, I turned on the bedside light. The voices didn't stop immediately but seemed to fade, like someone turning down the volume on a radio, until there was only silence. I've often wondered what or who these voices could have been. Initially, I thought it was some sort of ghostly visitation, but the voices sounded so strange and inhuman that I began to doubt that theory. I wanted to ask the homeowners if they'd ever experienced anything similar, but since they were conservative folks, I decided not to. Soon after, they retired and moved to Florida, and due to their declining health, they haven't needed pet care since. I haven't been back to the house in over a year, but the memory of that night still lingers as a baffling and unsettling experience. My apartment occupies the second floor of an old Victorian home, built in the mid to late 1800s. If you've read my other stories, you know I experience occasional paranormal activity here. Nothing harmful or terrifying, just things that aren't exactly normal. Over the years, I've had objects move or transport from one room to another, furniture stack itself in impossible ways, my bed stripped while I was still lying in it, and my cat, Kirby, played with by an unseen presence. After more than a decade here, I've accepted these visitors. I think it's partly the age of the house and partly my own sensitivities. As long as they're respectful, I'm okay with it. This latest series of incidents started in mid-April. I came home to find my closet door open, which was unusual, but I brushed it off, thinking I might have forgotten to close it. This happened repeatedly for 2 weeks. Then it started occurring even when I was home. I'd close the door, only to find it open again later. The only thing that bothered me was the worry that Kirby might accidentally get locked inside. Finally, I moved a chair in front of the closet door, thinking that if it was just natural settling or a warped door, this would stop it. That night, as I sat at my computer working, I heard a scraping sound coming from the closet. I turned and saw the chair being pushed a few inches as the door slowly swung open. It was a little unnerving, but I couldn't look away, watching in a mix of fascination and fear. Nothing else happened, though. I forced myself to turn back to my work, my mind racing over what I'd just seen. Kirby lay calmly by the bedroom door, seemingly unbothered by whatever had caused the door to open. After a while, I got up and closed the door, which made Kirby sit up and look at me. You'd think they'd have the manners to at least close the door again. Huh, Kirb? I said half-jokingly. As I turned back, a loud crash stopped me in my tracks. On the floor lay an old plaster vase, shattered to pieces. It had been tucked away in the closet's corner, holding some faded silk flowers. This vase was a gift from my late son, and although it was inexpensive and unremarkable, it was precious to me. Seeing it broken felt like losing a part of him all over again. I sank to the floor, gathering up the pieces as tears filled my eyes. Through my tears, I started talking to whatever had done this. Now that was just mean and uncalled for. If that's how you're going to be, then you aren't welcome here. You have to go. Do you hear me? If you can't be respectful, then you can't stay. I stood up, clutching the pieces, and shut the door with my foot. Another strange event happened shortly after, on Mother's Day at around 2:20 a.m. I woke up to hear a music box playing the Unicorn song. Normally, a wind-up music box might play a few random notes due to vibrations, but this one played the entire song. I knew for a fact that it had been wound down completely, so it would have taken several turns of the key to make it play like that. Then, 3 days later, I was watching a movie in the living room. I got up to grab a drink, and when I sat back down, I felt a sharp stabbing pain. I jumped up to find a large sewing needle stuck in the seat cushion. I had no idea how it got there. Not funny, I said aloud. Other incidents included clothes disappearing, only to reappear folded neatly in strange places like under my mattress or inside a desk drawer. My reading glasses went missing and were later found balanced on the crossbars inside the living room lampshade. Odd things like that kept happening. But after the night of the chair moving and the vase breaking, I'd had enough. Since then, the closet door has stayed shut, and things have finally quieted down again. I was born a believer in spirits and ghosts, and over time, I've come to feel that it's my family and I who are haunted, not the houses we live in. I'm 17 now, but I've seen enough paranormal activity to shake even the bravest. It all began before I was even born. My mom was about 7 months pregnant with me when her best friend died in a car accident. He passed away later that day at the hospital. When he died, my parents inherited the house he had lived in. I was born 2 months later, and my mom says the strange occurrences began not long after they brought me home. She remembers hearing my rattles go off by themselves in the dead of night, even though everyone was asleep. Sometimes I would cry, only to calm down moments later as if someone or something was comforting me. She found it unsettling but hoped it would pass. Growing up, I thought hearing voices and seeing shadows was normal, since it happened often. I'd hear whispers from my closet, and I'd tell my mom that there were eyes staring at me from my doorframe in the dark. She brushed it off, but when I was about 8, we were lying on her bed in the master bedroom when the door suddenly slammed shut. A male voice called out, "Help me," my mom's name. After that, she couldn't deny it. We were haunted possibly by her best friend, who had died in such a tragic way. The last major incident in that house happened around midnight. I heard a noise that sounded like a plastic bag rustling in my room. Thinking it was a mouse, I ran to the living room where my mom was. She went into my room, but the sound had stopped, and there were no plastic bags in sight. Needless to say, I slept in her room that night. But it didn't end with that house. Since then, we've moved 5 times, and each place has had its own share of activity. Our second home was a 2-story house, and we'd often hear footsteps above us, as well as sounds on the stairs. There was a constant sense of unease. I couldn't sleep peacefully because I felt the presence of a little girl who liked to play tricks. She'd throw things, giggle, and run around, making the wood floors creak every night. Our third house was the calmest of all. We'd occasionally hear footsteps or voices, but nothing too alarming. One day, while home sick from school, I felt someone rubbing my back. I'm still not sure if it really happened or if it was just a side effect of the medicine I was on. After that, we moved in with my grandparents. Their house had been built by my grandfather's grandparents in the 1920s, and to this day, our family believes it's haunted. My great-great-grandmother used a cane in her later years, and sometimes late at night, you can hear what sounds like a cane tapping on the floor, followed by soft, shuffling footsteps. My grandparents also have a basement we don't go into. In the 80s, my grandmother had a terrifying experience down there. She was attacked by an unseen force. She still won't talk about it, but my mom remembers her coming back up the stairs, bruised and with blood on her face. Finally, we moved into the apartment I'm sitting in as I write this. We've been here about 5 years, and this place has some of the most intense activity. A few weeks after we moved in, I was taking a shower when I heard the bathroom door open and a deep voice asked, "Do you need a towel?" Strangely, I actually did need one, but I wasn't about to answer. When I got out, the door was closed again, though I hadn't heard it shut, and it makes a distinct noise when it closes. My brother's room is, in my opinion, the most haunted in the apartment. We've heard a little girl's voice in there several times, and his closet frequently makes strange noises or opens and closes on its own. His room is always colder than the rest of the apartment, and the heater doesn't seem to make a difference, even though we know it works. Shadows appear regularly, and we hear voices a lot, especially in his room. In my own room, I sometimes hear knocking sounds coming from inside the wall, and occasionally, a deep male voice will say things, even my name.